What if I told you about a spot on our planet that should never exist, but nonetheless does? Ruins that contradict our previous understanding of history lie concealed beneath forests, deserts, and oceans. Too complex buildings, too ancient cultures, and too many unexplained artifacts. Discover in today's riddle why the specialists are secretly perplexed and why this finding was never meant to be revealed to the public. Get 7 years of good fortune by subscribing before we start. Furthermore, I must know your origin if you're currently viewing this. By the way, what time does it start there? Leave a remark with it. Come on, relax. We must solve the riddle they wished we would never discuss. The golden-tongued skeleton. When archaeologists dig in long-forgotten necropolises, it's usually a peaceful dig. We were in the year 2021, near Alexandria, Egypt, not far from the ancient city of Tepe Magna. A group of Dominican and Egyptian archaeologists had been painstakingly excavating a burial site. A same pattern emerged from a majority of the tombs they discovered. Modest, decaying, sand-layered, and disintegrating. Something that stuck out, nevertheless, was unveiled in one of the tombs. A human skeleton lay delicately inside a tomb made of stone. Ancient, delicate, bones worn down by the passage of time. What they discovered within the skull's mouth, however, shocked not only the scientists but the entire world. A vibrant tongue. Not some abstract idea, not some trinket set aside. Rather, a thin, intricately carved slab of gold in the shape of an undeniable human tongue set right where the formerly spoken by the person who has passed away. A new mystery had begun, the golden tongue. They first speculated that it might have been a one-off ceremony. However, the team discovered not one, but multiple identical graves as they continued to excavate in adjacent tombs. A gold tongue nested inside the jaw, mummified or skeletal remains, and the design repeated in each. Why? An explanation was not provided in writing. Gleaming, purposeful, and indisputably important, there are no inscriptions to decipher, simply the thing itself. Forensic historians were captivated. Temples honoring the underworld and resurrection deities Osiris and Isis were formerly located at the Tepe Magna site. Is there a connection between those beliefs and the golden tongue? According to ancient Egyptian belief, the afterlife was a dangerous voyage for the soul. There was a weighing of the heart, an opportunity for defense speech, and a final judgment for the deceased. The golden tongue may have served as a spiritual instrument, according to some scholars, that the dead could use to make their cases known to the gods beyond death, trial room. Others pondered whether it represented social rank. Might this have been reserved for a chosen few, priests, nobility, or individuals thought to convey messages to the afterlife? But that was far from the end. Not long after, findings quite identical to these ones were made in very separate areas. A silver tongue was found in an old Turkish tomb. Thin sheets of gold, inscribed with sacred inscriptions and occasionally wound into scrolls and laid close to the lips or hands of the departed, have been discovered in Greece many decades previously. In terms of identical to, or perhaps linked to, the tongues of Tepe Magna, a few of academics started to paint a more inclusive image. Was there a secret language, a series of rites that emphasized speaking, the ability to communicate after death, or some universal set of beliefs that cut across cultures? Some even went farther. Their observation was that, according to Egyptian mythology, being silent might be a curse. To be mute in hereafter was to be forgotten, unjudged, and lost. Being silent meant being eliminated. Maybe these gilded tongues weren't merely artifacts of religion, but rather a final, desperate attempt. Refuge, the last opportunity for the voiceless to be heard. However, that raises a more sinister inquiry. Who on earth were these folks? There were no pharaohs here. Nobody here was a monarch. Many of their graves were incomplete and somewhat small. The skeletons showed the effects of time, labor, and wear and tear. This was a group of regular folks. Still, someone went to the trouble and expense of giving them golden mouths. Were they revered, feared, or even cursed during their lifetime? Some fringe scholars have even more outlandishly proposed the idea that these individuals may have served as oracles or conduits. Believe the golden tongue served as a means of communication between the living and the dead, a protection against harm, and even a means of confinement once they had passed on from this life. Why else would someone go to such extreme lengths to ensure a natural-looking replacement for their tongue? This theory has not been confirmed. No documentation has been found to corroborate the practice. However, the uniformity among tombs and the fine craftsmanship of the goldsmithing indicate that these were not coincidental. Each step was predetermined. Yes, this was faith. The skeletons remained silent. Of course, they cannot tell us who they were. But the golden tongues they carried suggest they were meant to speak, not to us, but to something beyond. And maybe if you were to stand in that ancient chamber late at night, the gold might still glimmer, and the silence might not feel quite so silent. The city that burns from below. There is a place hidden beneath the surface of the earth where fire has been burning for centuries. Not metaphorical fire, not war, not some poetic image of destruction. Real fire, endless fire, ancient fire, and no one truly knows how it started or if it was ever meant to stop. This is the story of the underground burning city, where an eternal flame has reshaped everything around it, leaving archaeologists, geologists, and historians with more questions than answers. And the most unsettling part, it wasn't a volcano. It wasn't lightning. And it wasn't anything natural, at least not entirely. It was human. It was ancient, and it should not be burning anymore. Let's step into the forgotten ruins of a place that once thrived until the ground beneath it caught fire and never stopped. Somewhere in the heart of eastern Turkey, archaeologists stumbled upon an unusual series of ruins in the 1940s. The locals had a name for the area, Yanardağ, which roughly means flaming stone in Turkish. But when researchers began studying it in detail, they quickly realized this was more than just a natural gas leak. This wasn't like the door to hell in Turkmenistan, which only ignited in the 1970s. And it wasn't an accidental fire. This was a city, or at least a complex, built deliberately atop something that had already been burning. Even in ancient Greek records, the area was known as Mount Chimera, and it was said to be a place where eternal flames burst from the rocks impossible to extinguish. Sailors used it as a navigational beacon long before lighthouses. Some even believed it was sacred, a place where gods made contact with Earth. But what archaeologists found beneath the modern hillside told a stranger story. They discovered layers of ruins stacked and collapsed upon one another. Homes, workshops, a central gathering area, and evidence of at least 3 separate civilizations that built and rebuilt over the same location, each aware of the flames. It's as if they saw the fire and still chose to live there. One layer of the ruins dates back to the Hellenistic period nearly 2,200 years ago. Beneath that, signs of a Phrygian settlement. And deeper still, something far older, fragments of pottery and walls blackened by soot, possibly going back 4,000 years. And yet, in every layer, you see the same thing. No evidence that anyone ever tried to put the fires out. Instead, they built around them. They dug channels, stone-lined pits, even crude ventilation systems. As if the fire wasn't an accident. It was part of the plan. Geologists eventually discovered the source of the flame, naturally venting methane, leaking through cracks in the Earth's crust. The gases ignite upon exposure to air. But here's where it gets weird. There are other places on Earth with similar geology. Gas vents in Azerbaijan, Iran, and parts of Siberia, and none of them were settled by thousands of people for centuries. So why here? Why did ancient people risk their lives to build on top of a leaking fire? Some believe it was a religious site, a kind of ancient oracle center like Delhi in Greece, but no central temple has been found. Others think it was a place of industry where the flame was used for forging tools or pottery, but there are no smelting furnaces in the oldest layer. Then there's the strange discovery of carbonized bones, charred but still intact, buried in a stone-lined shaft that seems intentionally constructed. The remains weren't dumped, they were placed, arranged, possibly sacrificed. There's a chilling theory among some researchers that this burning city was a controlled experiment passed down through oral tradition, a secret knowledge of how to use natural gas as energy long before the industrial age, and maybe even as a form of power or control. What if the flame was used as proof of divine connection, a way to rule? More recently, satellite imagery showed heat signatures still rising from beneath the ruins, not just from the visible flames above, but from deep underground pockets no one has mapped. And here's where the mystery deepens. In 2019, an archaeological team used thermal imaging and ground-penetrating radar to examine deeper sections of the site. What they found is still under review, but preliminary notes mention the existence of a buried chamber beneath the hottest flame source, one with no known access. It's as if someone built a room under the eternal fire and then sealed it forever. The speculation runs wild. Some believe it could hold ritual items. Others suspect it was a sealed tomb meant to protect whatever was inside or keep it from ever escaping. No one has opened it yet. No excavation permit has been granted. The ground is unstable. The gas still leaks, and any digging might risk triggering a collapse or worse, an explosion. And so the chamber remains hidden beneath an ancient, undying flame. There's something haunting about a city like this, something that taps into our oldest instincts. Fire has always been a symbol of transformation, of destruction, of rebirth. But this fire doesn't die. It doesn't cleanse or renew. It just keeps burning century after century. It raises uncomfortable questions about how much ancient people knew about energy, chemistry, geology, and how much they never wrote down. Knowledge passed from master to apprentice, from ruler to successor. Lost not because it failed, but because it was too dangerous to be remembered. Maybe they didn't build over the flame out of ignorance. Maybe they understood it better than we do. And maybe, just maybe, some parts of history are still burning beneath our feet, waiting to be rediscovered. The stone that records Earth's heartbeat. There's a place tucked away in the quiet folds of the Ural Mountains where the trees stand tall and still, and time feels like it moves just a little slower. Most who pass through wouldn't notice anything unusual. The land looks ordinary, peaceful. Nothing screams mystery. But hidden there, half buried in the soil, is an ancient slab of stone. It doesn't look like much at first glance. It's not carved, not decorated, just a cold, silent piece of rock. But for those who've studied it, those who've lingered a little longer, there's something it does that no one can explain. It pulses softly, quietly, like a heartbeat. Not the heartbeat of a person, but something older, something deeper. The first time anyone noticed, it was in the 1970s. A small team of geologists had been sent out to this remote part of Russia to study underground movement. They were testing soil stability, setting up seismic monitors, and taking readings like they usually did. It was supposed to be a routine job, but then one of their instruments picked up a signal, a slow, steady rhythm, one beat every 26 seconds. At first, they thought it was a mistake, maybe a faulty sensor or interference from equipment. But when they checked again, the rhythm was still there. When they moved the equipment, even a few feet away, the signal faded. When they brought it back near the stone, it returned perfectly timed every time. One slow pulse followed by silence, then another, over and over again. It was almost as if the stone itself was alive, as if it was keeping time. They stayed for days, trying to understand it. They dug around the stone, took samples, ran electrical scans. Nothing explained it. The rock wasn't made of anything exotic. No metal, no crystal core, no strange composition. It was by all measurements just a chunk of ancient basalt. But none of that answered why it pulsed or how. News of the stone didn't travel far. Back then, strange discoveries were often buried under bureaucracy, especially in Soviet-era research. Files went missing, reports were delayed, and soon the story faded. Just another curiosity in a sea of forgotten field notes. But the heartbeat never stopped. Years later, a new team of researchers stumbled on the same phenomenon. This time, they weren't geologists. They were part of a small expedition studying local folklore. Villagers nearby had told stories of a living rock in the forest. Some said it whispered at night. Others said if you sat quietly beside it, you'd feel something thumping beneath you like a distant drum. A few even claimed the stone could make people dream more vividly. Of course, most brushed it off as imagination, but one researcher, a quiet man named Alexei, decided to test the stories. He brought modern seismic tools, placed them gently around the stone, and once again there it was. One pulse every 26 seconds. Still perfectly regular, still impossible to explain. No power lines nearby, no underground machinery, nothing that could create a signal so stable, so consistent, and yet completely natural. And then something stranger happened. They noticed the pulses changed slightly during certain phases of the moon. When there was a full moon, the pulse was a little stronger, not faster, just heavier. During a new moon, the pulse weakened, as if the stone were resting. Could it be reacting to the lunar cycle? Could it somehow be connected to Earth's gravitational rhythm? It raised a haunting question. What if the stone wasn't just pulsing? What if it was listening? Some began to wonder if it might be part of something much larger, like a node, one point in a hidden network beneath the Earth. Perhaps there were others like it, scattered in forgotten corners of the world, beating together in sync, keeping time like the gears of some ancient forgotten clock. There are ancient myths from many cultures about stones that live, stones that breathe. In Hindu traditions, there's talk of sacred stones that pulse with life. In Celtic lore, certain boulders were believed to contain the memories of the earth. And among some Native American tribes, it said that the land itself keeps track of what we do, recording every step, every sound, every heartbeat. What if this stone in the Urals wasn't just a rock? What if it was a memory core, a geological recorder of time itself? The idea seems wild, outlandish, but the pulse remains. No scientist has offered a clear answer. No, one has recreated the phenomenon in a lab. Every attempt to simulate the same 26-second pulse fails. And here's another twist. Satellites orbiting the Earth have detected faint pulses also at 26-second intervals coming from deep below the planet's surface. They're so faint most systems ignore them, but they match the signal from the stone. It's as if Earth itself is quietly ticking, and this stone is one place where we can actually hear it. It makes you wonder, how many other things have we missed? How many pieces of this planet are quietly speaking, waiting for someone to listen long enough? Could it be that what we call a mystery is just something that doesn't fit into our modern framework of understanding? That the Earth has ways of keeping time, telling stories, remembering that we've simply forgotten how to interpret. So next time you're out in nature, maybe sitting on a rock in a forest or beside a quiet hill, pause for a moment. Let the silence settle. You might not hear anything right away, but perhaps if you wait long enough, you'll feel it. A faint rhythm, a slow, steady beat. Not yours, not someone else's, but something older, deeper, the heartbeat of the Earth itself. The skeletons with elongated skulls. There are some discoveries that sit quietly in the background of science. They don't get shouted about. They don't appear in textbooks. And yet, they refuse to go away. In museums, locked cabinets, and archaeological storerooms across the world, there are human skulls that don't look like they should. They're longer, taller, more curved than expected. Some people call them deformed. Others think they're just rare anomalies. But the deeper you look, the more difficult it becomes to explain them away. These are the elongated skulls, and they've been found in surprising numbers in regions far from each other. Peru, Russia, Egypt, Mexico, Malta, and even parts of Europe. Thousands of them. Not just one or two strange cases. Not just the result of isolated cultural practices, but widespread, consistent, and in some cases eerily uniform. Let's begin with the most famous example, the Paracas skulls. Discovered in the 1920s by Peruvian archaeologist Julio in the desert peninsula of Paracas. These skulls weren't just elongated, they were anatomically different. Some had a brain volume that appeared up to 25% larger than that of a modern human. Others had different cranial sutures. Many were found buried in elaborate graves surrounded by high-quality textiles, jewelry, and ceremonial items, suggesting they belong to an elite class. Now, cranial deformation is a known practice across ancient civilizations. People in many cultures wrapped an infant's head with cloth or would to shape the skull over time. It was usually done for aesthetic or social reasons, a symbol of status or tribal identity. But here's the issue. Artificial cranial deformation changes the shape of the skull, not the volume. It doesn't create more bone. It doesn't change the position of the form and magnum, the hole where the spine connects to the skull. It doesn't alter suture patterns or create new bone density. And yet, in a number of elongated skulls, especially in Paracus, some of these differences are exactly what researchers have reported. Thicker bone, fewer or absent sutures, displacement of the cranial base, features that don't align with intentional binding. So, if these skulls weren't shaped by outside pressure, what were they? The question gets more complicated when we look at their age. Many of these skulls date back over 2,000 years to a time before European contact, before the Incan Empire, before any written history in that region. And still, they exhibit characteristics modern humans do not. There's a theory, and it's not a fringe one, that these people may have been a genetically distinct group, a branch of ancient humanity that either went extinct or was absorbed into larger populations and forgotten. Some call them hybrids. Others call them elite bloodlines. But their existence is documented, photographed, even DNA tested in recent years with early results pointing to unusual maternal lineages not native to South America. But let's step back for a moment. Why would ancient people around the world in cultures that never interacted perform the same practice of elongating skulls? In Africa, the Mangita did it. In ancient China, there are records. In Eastern Europe, elongated skulls were discovered in elite Scythian graves. Across the Pacific, in Polynesia, even in some early Australian communities, the technique was different. The materials changed, but the goal was always the same, a tall, narrow skull. And often it was restricted to nobility, high priests, or rulers. So the question becomes more psychological than anatomical. Why were people trying to look this way? Or were they imitating? Could there have been a group of people thousands of years ago with naturally elongated skulls, seen not as monsters, but as leaders? Could these practices be a cultural memory passed down from time when those skull shapes weren't artificial at all? There's another detail that often gets overlooked. In places like Peru, elongated skulls were sometimes buried with red hair, a genetic trait extremely rare among native populations. Their bones tested unusually high in strontium, suggesting different diets, different mobility, even different environmental exposures than the people living around them. It's as if they didn't just look different, they were different. Of course, these ideas make mainstream scholars uncomfortable. The standard explanation remains that all elongated skulls are the result of binding, that none of the physical differences matter, that cultural imitation is enough to explain global patterns. But that doesn't sit well with everyone. Some researchers argue that we are missing a chapter in human history, that at some point in the distant past, a distinct group of hominids existed. They may have been a subspecies or simply a variation of early humans, but they were remembered, respected, mimicked, and then they disappeared. Maybe through conflict, maybe by assimilation, maybe they were never widespread enough to leave behind their own cities, just burial grounds and whispers of their presence. But their skulls remain. No one has been able to create a consistent scientific explanation for the most extreme examples. Even now, with advanced imaging technology and genetics, there are more questions than answers. It's worth asking, if the modern world discovered a living person with a skull like that today, taller, denser, and shaped unlike any human, how would we explain it? Would we say it was evolution, mutation, or evidence of something much older and much more forgotten? Let's bring it back to the present. Right now, in a museum drawer, one of these skulls sits, perhaps labeled, perhaps photographed, maybe even forgotten. It doesn't look like yours. It doesn't look like mine. It's quiet still, but it holds within it a puzzle, one that challenges our understanding of who we are and who came before us. And in a world where history often feels written in stone, these skulls remain one of the few pieces that simply don't fit. So tonight, as you rest and let your thoughts drift, remember that not everything in our history is known. Some of it is shaped differently, hidden not in myth but in bone. And some mysteries aren't buried. They're sitting right in front of us in plain sight, waiting to be seen for what they really are. The underground city no one expected to find. In the heart of Turkey Key's Cappadocia region, beneath a town once thought to be unremarkable, a hidden world was accidentally discovered in 2014. Construction workers were demolishing buildings in Nevşehir to make way for a modern housing project. When they broke through the ground and found something no one expected, it started with a narrow tunnel carved, not natural, then chambers, then stone walls, then corridors, not a cave, but something far bigger. What they had stumbled into wasn't just old. It was enormous. As archaeologists rushed in, it became clear they had uncovered an ancient underground city, one of the largest ever found. A sprawling, multi-level labyrinth hidden beneath modern streets. The discovery stretched across at least 460,000 square meters, reaching as deep as 113 meters underground, possibly more. It wasn't the first underground city discovered in Cappadocia. The region is famous for its soft volcanic rock that ancient people carved into homes, churches, and even entire communities. Dereniu and Kaimaki are both well-known subterranean sites. But this one was different. It wasn't just a few levels deep. It included water channels, air shafts, wells, food storage rooms, kitchens, wine cellars, stables, and entire living quarters, but also defensive traps. Stone doors that could roll shut from the inside, and a design that clearly wasn't haphazard. It was planned, engineered, hidden. Some tunnels were so long and narrow, it would have taken hours to crawl from one end to the other. Others were tall enough for groups of people to pass through on foot. The city had its own ventilation system designed to bring in fresh air from the surface. It had access to water from underground sources. It even had places of worship carved into the stone halls where people may have prayed, gathered, or waited in silence. But why was it built and when? That's where the mystery begins. Estimates of the underground city's age vary. Some say it dates back to the Byzantine era, about 1,500 years ago. Others believe it may go back much further, possibly to the Hittites over 3,500 years ago. A few even suggest it was first carved in the Bronze Age and expanded repeatedly by different civilizations over time. But none of those timelines fully explain the scale or the reason. Why would anyone dig a city this massive entirely? Underground? The most accepted theory is that it was used as a refuge, a place where entire populations could retreat during invasions. Cappadocia was a crossroads of ancient conflict. Persians, Romans, Byzantines, Seljuks, and Mongols all passed through. A city underground could provide shelter for thousands, protecting them from war, persecution, and possibly climate extremes. And yet, some parts of this particular site were sealed off in a way that suggests people didn't return. Storage rooms still held sealed jars and containers. Pathways were blocked, entrances hidden. It doesn't feel like a shelter someone planned to use again. It feels like something abandoned on purpose and very carefully. Some archaeologists notice that certain tunnels connect in ways that imply escape routes or secret movement between different levels. Others point out that even with modern tools, replicating this structure would take enormous effort and time. There's also the problem of documentation. None of the major historical texts that describe Cappadocia in ancient times mention a city like this under Nevi. It's as though no one above ground even knew it existed. Not a word in ancient records, not a story passed down through generations. So who built it? Was it a local population carving over centuries? Or was there an unknown civilization that specialized in this kind of construction? Some theorists, not fringe ones, have noted that to remove the amount of rock needed to build the city, workers would have had to extract hundreds of thousands of tons of material. Yet, the stone debris is missing. It's never been located nearby. So either it was carried away over time, or the methods used were different than what we think. In a world without electricity or mechanized tools, how do they create a structure that includes multiple stories, precision-cut rooms, and an air system that still functions today? The stone itself offers few clues. Volcanic tuff is soft when first cut, but it hardens with time, so the walls now are solid and enduring, but they leave little evidence of the tools used to carve them. There are even whispers of older foundations, levels deeper than the known city that may predate the rest by centuries or more. These haven't been fully excavated. Some of the lowest chambers are filled with rubble or sealed entirely. And of course, when mysteries like this surface, so do the theories. Some say it was built to survive a cataclysm, a natural disaster, a celestial event. That's why it goes so deep. That's why it's sealed. That's why it could support life for an extended time. Others suggest a religious motivation, that this was a sanctuary carved in secrecy. Maybe it was both. Whatever the reason, the fact remains a city designed to sustain thousands of people was carved by hand, hidden beneath modern buildings, and forgotten for centuries until a backhoe cracked open the ceiling. Today, parts of the underground city are still closed to the public. Archaeologists continue to explore it slowly, documenting each level, photographing each object left behind, trying to piece together not just how it was built, but why. It's a reminder that the ground beneath our feet isn't always what it seems. That sometimes entire chapters of human history are right below us, waiting to be uncovered. And even now, with all our technology and satellite mapping, we had no idea this city was there until we accidentally broke into it. So tonight, as your thoughts wander into the past, think of what else might be hidden just a few feet below us. How many more cities lie waiting, unseen, untouched, beneath the places we walk every day, the metal library hidden beneath the jungle? In the dense forests of Ecuador, there's stories of something buried deep underground. Something not made of stone or wood, but entirely of metal. Not just tools or weapons, but books. Metal books. The story begins with a man named Juan Moratz, an Argentinian-Hungarian explorer. In 1965, he claimed to have made a discovery that could rewrite human history. Deep inside the Tepe caves of Ecuador, Moratz said he found a massive underground complex, one that didn't seem natural. He claimed it wasn't just a cave. It was a series of chambers and tunnels carved with such precision it looked engineered. But it wasn't the geometry of the place that captured the world's attention. It was what he claimed to find inside. He spoke of a library made entirely of metal. Hundreds of books, each weighing several pounds, engraved with strange symbols. The books, he said, were stacked on metal shelves arranged in rows. Alongside them were sculptures of animals, metallic plaques, and even what he described as a golden sarcophagus. It sounded impossible. Books made of metal, an underground library in a jungle cave. No known civilization in that region was believed capable of such a feat, but Moretz stood by his claim, and eventually his story caught the attention of a well-known figure, Erich von Daniken, the author of Chariots of the Gods. Von Daniken included the metal library in his work, using it as possible evidence for ancient advanced civilizations or even extraterrestrial influence. The story began to spread. In 1976, a major expedition was organized to investigate the Tepe caves. The team was large, over 100 people, including scientists, British and Ecuadorian military personnel, and even Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. They spent more than a month inside the Tepe caves, mapping, documenting, and exploring every chamber they could access. What did they find? Natural beauty, strange formations long corridors, but no metal books, no library, no statues, no golden coffin. For many, that was enough to dismiss the entire story. Just another tall tale, they said. A jungle myth. But others weren't convinced. The caves were massive, far larger than what the expedition could cover. Some sections were too deep, too dangerous, or simply too hidden to explore fully. And Moratz never said the library was easy to reach. He claimed he had gone through narrow passages known only to locals. In fact, after the expedition returned, Moratz insisted they had searched the wrong part of the cave system. He never showed the location again, and in 1991, he died without ever revealing it. Others have tried to follow in his footsteps, including explorers like Stan Hall and Moritz's own associates. Some locals in Ecuador continue to believe in the library's existence. Others say they've seen parts of it, but no one has brought back physical proof. Still, over the years, bits and pieces have emerged. Small metallic objects, unusual engraved. Plates, even artifacts with unknown symbols, but nothing that clearly confirms the existence of a metal library. Skeptics point out that no culture in that region had ever developed a tradition of metal books. But defenders of the story ask, why would someone invent something so specific? Why not claim to find gold or treasure like others do? Why books? What civilization in the heart of pre-Columbian Ecuador would choose to write its knowledge onto metal pages and bury it underground? Some believe it was a lost civilization, an advanced culture wiped out before history began. Others suggest it might have been a form of knowledge preservation hidden from invaders, floods, or even cosmic events. Still others believe the metal books might contain knowledge humanity wasn't ready for. There's also the question of engineering. Morats and others claim the cave passages were straight and sharply angled, as though carved with intent, not formed naturally. And yet, geologists in the 1970s expedition reported that most of what they saw appeared natural, created by underground rivers. But were they looking in the right place? The Taos caves stretch for miles. Only a fraction has been properly mapped. Even today, modern expeditions with drones and ground-penetrating radar struggle to navigate the terrain. The dense jungle above, the unstable floors below. It all adds to the difficulty. There are even stories among the Shure people, the local indigenous community, about sacred places inside the caves, places where outsiders are not permitted, places protected by spirits, stories that go back long before Moritz. Is it possible that the Shure or some ancient culture before them hid something deliberately deep inside the earth away from prying eyes? There's another detail that's easy to miss. Moritz never published photographs of the metal library, but some people close to him claimed they had seen sketches. Others claimed he once held a small metallic plaque with unusual markings on it. These artifacts, if they existed, have never been recovered. The biggest question, of course, remains. Why metal books? Was it because metal would survive where paper would rot? Or were they meant to be unreadable by ordinary people, written in a language only a select few could decipher? If the books ever existed, they would be among the oldest examples of recorded information in human history, older than Sumerian tablets, older than Egyptian papyri, and yet they remain hidden. Or perhaps they were never real at all. No scientific proof has yet confirmed their existence. No photos, no books, just the testimony of a handful of people and the lingering mystery of a cave system too large and too dark to ever fully understand. But sometimes that's all a mystery needs to survive. So tonight, as you let your thoughts drift into forgotten corners of the earth, imagine a place hidden deep beneath the jungle, silent, untouched, filled with cold metallic pages, waiting to be read again. Not for treasure, but for truth. A truth buried in metal, sealed in stone, and guarded by time itself. The stone heads of the Forgotten Island. Hidden in the Pacific Ocean lies one of the world's most mysterious and isolated land masses. Easter Island, locally known as Rapa Nui. It's a remote volcanic island just 63 square miles in size, sitting over 2,000 m away from the nearest continent. And yet, scattered across this lonely piece of land stand nearly 1,000 massive stone statues called moai, some towering over 30 foot tall and weighing up to 80 tons. For centuries, these statues have puzzled explorers, researchers, and archaeologists alike. Who carved them? Why were they made? And perhaps most mysteriously of all, how were they moved? Because here's what truly breaks logic. The moai are not just near the quarries. Many are located miles inland, some even perched on high ridgeal lines and coastal platforms. And remember, this island had no wheels, no large animals, and its people used stone tools, no metal, no cranes, no draft animals. Nothing that could easily explain how multi-tonon statues were transported uphill. One of the first outsiders to arrive, Dutch explorer Jacob Roggevon in 1722 was stunned. He described the statues in his journal as incomprehensibly large, standing silent and immovable in the wind. Since then, modern archaeologists have tried everything to replicate the feat. Some believe the statues were dragged using ropes. Others suggest a walking motion, rocking the statues forward inch by inch. But even under controlled experiments, it takes dozens of people, perfect terrain, and lighter models. The islanders supposedly did it with hundreds of statues, some heavier than a modern tank, across rugged volcanic slopes. It just doesn't add up. But that's only the beginning of the mystery. Beneath Minimois, archaeologists found full torsos buried underground. For years, people assumed the heads were just that, heads. But once excavated, some statues revealed entire bodies complete with arms, hands, and detail carvings. No one had seen them for centuries because volcanic ash and centuries of soil buildup had hidden them. Even more curiously, many of these buried bodies are inscribed with unfamiliar symbols, what researchers call rango-rango. It's a script made of looping glyph-like markings that resemble known writing system. To this day, no one has definitively deciphered Ranger-Rango. Some believe it's a form of proto-writing. Others think it may have held religious meaning or encoded astronomical knowledge. But without a Rosetta Stone, we can't read their message. And then there's the collapse. Easter Island civilization didn't fade gently. It shattered. Evidence suggests that by the 17th century, the island's population dropped dramatically. Many moai were toppled. Ritual platforms were destroyed. Some researchers blame deforestation, the idea that the Rapa Nui people cut down all the trees, leading to societal collapse. But others argue that theory doesn't explain everything. Deforestation wouldn't cause systematic statue toppling or violent cultural shifts. Oral traditions from the islanders speak of internal warfare, spiritual collapse, and even outside contact before Europeans officially arrived. There's also mention of long-eared people, short-eared people, and conflicts between them, adding another layer of enigma to the island's past. What's even more surprising, genetic studies have found trace Polynesian and native South American markers in some Rapa Nui remains. That suggests pre-Columbian contact with South America, a theory mainstream historians still debate. If true, it means people from the Andes may have traveled across over 2,000 miles of open ocean, centuries before European ships even reached the Americas. How? No one knows. There are no surviving maps, no records, no verified ocean-worthy vessel from that era. But the traces exist in DNA, in plant species, and in shared cultural echoes. The moai themselves don't speak. They never have. But their presence says everything. They tell a story of a civilization that mastered stone, navigation, spiritual belief, and engineering only to vanish before the world ever truly saw them. The question that haunts so many is this. What don't? We know, because they never wrote it down. Maybe the statues were more than art. Maybe they marked something, a map, a calendar, a warning, or maybe they were trying to be remembered. Either way, the silent stone heads still stand, watching the waves, facing inland, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to finally understand what happened to the people who gave them life. And still, no one has the 10,000-year-old road beneath the lake. In northern Michigan, there's a lake that most people pass by without a second glance. Lake Huron, one of North America's Great Lakes, stretches over 23,000 square miles. For generations, it was simply a body of water, vast, cold, and deep. But in 2007, something extraordinary was discovered at its bottom. And it wasn't a shipwreck. It was a road, not a natural ridge or a rock formation, but a deliberately arranged stone path stretching for nearly half a kilometer. Researchers from the University of Michigan, using sonar scans and underwater exploration, found rows of boulders, some upright, some paired in patterns, and others carefully spaced. This wasn't random glacial movement. It looked built. At first, they were skeptical. Surely, this was just a geological coincidence. But as the scans progressed, They found stone alignments, carvings, and even evidence of hunting blinds, structures once used by early humans to corral animals. That changed everything, because this road lies beneath 121 feet of water, buried under thousands of years of lake sediment. Geological models confirmed it could only have been dry land during a specific period around 10,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age when the Great Lakes were still forming. So the question became, who built it? 10,000 years ago, most of North America was still recovering from glacial retreat. The people who lived then, known to archaeologists as Paleo-Indians, were believed to be small bands of hunter-gatherers, no cities, no architecture, no stone structures. But here at the bottom of a lake is evidence that these early humans may have engineered an entire landscape. The underwater features resemble caribou hunting structures found in Alaska and the Canadian Arctic. In those regions, indigenous groups once built drive lines of stones to funnel herds into traps. But this find in Lake Huron is older and more complex than anything found before. That has massive implications. It means that 10,000 years ago, humans in what is now Michigan were not just surviving. They were building, coordinating in groups large enough to move stones, design patterns, and control wild herds. That kind of behavior doesn't happen overnight. It suggests an intelligent culture with knowledge of animal behavior, environment, and long-term planning. But here's where it gets stranger. Some of the stones appear deliberately shaped, not just placed. One boulder has carvings that may be a form of petroglyph, though erosion makes it hard to interpret. Another feature appears to be a stone circle, like a rudimentary hearth or ritual site. These features are too deep, too undisturbed, and too consistent to be accidents. So, why haven't we heard more about this? Because the site is difficult to access. The water is cold and dark, visibility is poor, and funding for long-term underwater archaeology is limited. Unlike Egypt or Mesopotamia, submerged North American sites rarely get global attention. And yet, this one might be just the beginning because the Ice Age was not static. Sea levels changed. Glacial lakes rose and fell. Entire land bridges disappeared. Many archaeologists now believe that vast areas of early human activity are lost beneath water. Not just here, but across the world. Off the coast of British Columbia, sonar has revealed similar submerged stone walls. In Florida, archaeologists found 7,000 old burial sites under freshwater springs. In the Persian Gulf, evidence suggests whole settlements now lie underwater, drowned when sea levels surged after the Ice Age. This isn't isolated. What Lake Huron tells us is simple but staggering. We've only begun to uncover what lies beneath. For centuries, we assumed history began with cities. Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indies. Valley. But discoveries like this hint at something deeper. A world of organized societies that existed long before writing, before pyramids, before bronze or iron. These people didn't leave behind temples or palaces, but they left roads, walls, carvings, and traces of intelligence. We still don't fully understand. What do they believe? Do they have rituals, stories? Do they bury their dead? We don't know, because all that remains is underwater, scattered stone paths in the dark, buried under cold silt, and forgotten. Time. But maybe one day, the lakes and seas will give up more of their secrets. Until then, the road beneath Lake Huron remains quiet, ancient, undisturbed, and completely unexplained. The ancient tomb with an unmelting ice core. High in the mountains of Mongolia, where the wind seems to carry memories older than words, and the horizon stretches over forgotten valleys, archaeologists stumbled upon something that defies both science and time. A burial mound containing a core of ice that has remained perfectly frozen for over 2,300 years, even as the surrounding permafrost melted. This isn't fiction. It was discovered in the Altai Mountains in the remote Yukhalak Plateau, an area so isolated and pristine that even the locals consider it sacred ground. In 1993, Russian researchers unearthed a burial site attributed to the Pazer culture, a mysterious nomadic group that lived in these mountains long before written history reached the steppes. Inside the mound was a wooden tomb chamber sealed with layers of earth and stones. But what stunned the researchers wasn't just the craftsmanship, it was the cold. The core of the burial remained encased in solid ice, perfectly preserving the body of a woman who had been buried more than 2 millennia ago. Her skin, tattoos, clothing, even the contents of her stomach were untouched by time. But how? Temperatures in the Altai region do freeze, but summer brings warmth. Many other burial sites nearby have suffered decay due to changing climate and thawing permafrost. But this tomb had stayed frozen for over 2,000 years, and it wasn't accidental. The researchers noticed something strange about how the tomb was built. Beneath the body were layers of tightly packed moss and organic material, almost like insulation. The coffin had been placed within a deeper wooden chamber, and the space around it was filled with stones and soil that would direct water and air away from the center. It was by all accounts deliberately engineered to stay frozen. But the people of the Pizarric didn't have thermodynamics textbooks or refrigeration. So how did they know? Some scholars suggest this might not have been intentional, that perhaps it was simply luck, cold climate, natural burial conditions, sealed chambers, but others believe otherwise. Because this wasn't an isolated case, multiple tombs in the region have been found with similar preservation. One even included preserved horses with decorative saddles, their hair and skin intact. Another contained intricately woven textiles with vibrant dyes still visible. It's as if the Pizarric knew how to stop time. Adding to the mystery is the identity of the woman in the ice. She is known today as the Siberian Ice Maiden. Her skin bore elaborate tattoos, spiraling animal motifs that matched artwork found in Pizarric petroglyphs. She was buried with intricate clothing, a tall headdress, and grave goods suggesting high status. Some speculate she was a priestess, others a shaman. But the real puzzle lies in what she represents. Because this culture left no written language, no known literature, no stone monuments, only these carefully constructed tombs built to preserve their dead in frozen silence. And yet the technology, the burial techniques, the cultural symbolism, they all speak of a deep understanding of temperature, preservation, ritual, and death. But why go to such lengths? Was this a way to preserve the body for a future life? Were they trying to communicate with those who would come thousands of years later? Or was it part of a spiritual belief? Perhaps the idea that freezing the body preserved the soul. No one knows. The Ice Maiden has been moved to a museum for preservation. But even that has stirred controversy. The local Alai people who consider her sacred believe the tomb should never have been opened. They say disturbing her brought imbalance to the land. Earthquakes, storms, and sickness. And whether you believe in such things or not, the timing was curious. So now this ancient tomb, with its unmelted ice and silent message, leaves us with more questions than answers. Was this preservation accidental or a forgotten science? How many other ancient cultures understood how to manipulate temperature and climate long before modern refrigeration? And most haunting of all, how much knowledge have we lost beneath the surface of time, buried not just in ice and earth, but in the rituals of people who left no words behind, only clues frozen in stillness. We stand in museums now, looking through glass at her face, her tattoos, her garments. But maybe, just maybe, she's still waiting. The ancient metal that shouldn't exist. In the Museum of Baghdad before it was looted in the early 2000s, there was once a small clay jar sitting quietly on a shelf. It didn't look like much. A simple vessel about 6 inches tall with a copper cylinder inside and an iron rod down the middle. But that little object might rewrite our understanding of electricity. It's known today as the Baghdad battery, and according to some researchers, it may be over 2,000 years old. When first discovered in the 1930s near modern-day Kujut Rao, the artifact was dismissed as just another storage jar. But upon closer examination, the strange construction raised questions. The copper tube inside the jar was sealed with asphalt, and the iron rod was isolated from the outer casing. When filled with vinegar or grape juice, both acidic liquids, the setup could produce a small electrical charge. That's when the real mystery began. Was this a primitive galvanic cell, a kind of battery built centuries before electricity was officially discovered? If so, who made it and why? No written records mention anything about electricity from that time. No tools that would clearly require power have ever been found near it. Yet, the structure of the artifact itself is so specific, so precise that some believe it couldn't have been made by accident. Some experts proposed it may have been used for electroplating, the process of depositing a thin layer of metal onto another surface. In other words, this battery might have been used to coat items in gold or silver thousands of years ago. But if that's true, where are the tools, the wires, the evidence of electrical workshops? And then there's an even stranger problem. The composition of the metals inside the battery has been analyzed multiple times. And in at least one version, not just the Baghdad battery, but similar objects found in other nearby tombs, the metal purity is far too high for what ancient blacksmiths should have been capable of producing. One sample even included a tin alloy that was only understood much later in European metallurgy. The implications, either someone in the ancient world had an understanding of metal chemistry that far outpaced their neighbors, or the origin of the artifact is not as straightforward as we think. And that's not the only anomaly. In recent years, similar jars and artifacts have been recovered in areas of Iran, southern Iraq, and even parts of Turkey, all sharing one strange trait: unusual metal construction with no clear explanation. Some of these were buried in tombs. Others were part of temple complexes. But in all cases, the same question remains. What were they doing with electricity? If they had no light bulbs, no motors, no machines, or is it possible they did have such technology, but we've just lost all record of it? Some fringe theorists jump straight to ancient aliens. Others point to lost civilizations destroyed by floods or time. But even serious archaeologists admit they don't have a good explanation. There's something unsettling about holding an object in your hand that behaves like modern technology, but comes from a time when no one was supposed to know how it works. Imagine someone in 500 BC mixing vinegar into a clay jar, not knowing the word voltage, but watching sparks leap off the iron rod. Imagine using it for rituals or healing or creating light without understanding the laws behind it. It opens a door to a forgotten kind of knowledge, a time when science, magic, and religion were all the same thing. And as we dig deeper into the ancient world, these small, strange artifacts keep showing up, little pieces of a puzzle we no longer know how to solve. The Baghdad battery may never give us all the answers. It may not have powered anything more than a flicker, but its existence challenges the timeline we've built, the neat linear path of human progress we like to believe in. Because if someone somewhere was creating electricity 2,000 years ago, what else did they know? And what else might we have lost? The underground city without entrances. Deep beneath a grassy hillside in the Cappadocia region of modern-day Turkey lies something that shouldn't exist. Not in the way it does, and certainly not in the era from which it comes. It's a city carved out of the volcanic rock, many layers deep with no clear entry point. This is not during Kuyu. It's not Calais. This is something older, something buried deeper. And for decades, it wasn't even known to exist. What tipped researchers off was a fluke. A vineyard owner digging to install a new irrigation system. Just a few feet down, his tool struck a hard, perfectly flat surface. It was stone, but not natural rock. This was clearly a man-carved slab, polished, weathered, and marked by strange, circular indentations. Curious, he kept digging. That slab turned out to be the ceiling of a chamber. And that chamber was the beginning of a descent that would take archaeologists down into a city without doors. Unlike other underground cities in the region, which have obvious ventilation shafts, hidden doors, and staircases built into rock walls, this one had none of that. The corridors didn't climb upward. They went deeper in slow spirals, like it was designed to sink away from the surface, not toward it. By the time excavators reached the fourth level, It was already larger than most known Cappadocian cities. There were storage rooms, sleeping chambers, communal halls, even what appeared to be a water system powered by underground aquifers. But the most baffling feature, there was no main entrance, no known shaft from above, no surface-level doorway sealed off by time. It was as if the city had been built from the inside out, meant to stay hidden. The only access they eventually found came from a collapsed section in a natural rock formation, something never intended to be used by people. So who carved it and why? Carbon dating of the organic materials found inside. Burned wood, a single worn sandal, and fragments of woven fiber suggested this underground city was inhabited around 4,000 years ago. That would place it before the Hittite Empire, before written records in the region, and long before tools capable of excavating soft volcanic rock at this scale were known to exist. And there's something else. In one of the larger central halls, archaeologists found walls marked with a repeating symbol, a kind of spiral with jagged extensions. It has no match in Hittite, Sumerian, or Luwian symbology. Some believe it may be prelinguistic, a sign used by an isolated people to communicate something sacred, or perhaps a warning. Because the deeper teams went, the stranger the city became. Ceilings started to arch in unnatural angles, as if mimicking surface topography underground. A series of vertical shafts lined with smooth spiral. Grooves appeared. Some speculated they may have functioned like sound channels or pressure valves. But pressure for what? When they reached the deepest point of excavation, a 9th level, the room was bare. No artifacts, no carvings, no markings, only a raised flat platform at the center of the chamber, made of a stone unlike any other in the structure. Black, slightly reflective, cold to the touch. And then the excavation stopped, not for lack of interest, but for reasons no one has officially confirmed. Some say the chamber emitted low-frequency hums at night, picked up by nearby sensors. Others say several workers reported vivid hallucinations after spending time in the lower levels. Whispers, cold spots, feelings of dread. The dig was quietly closed, the site sealed off, and the official records became strangely quiet. But local whispers never stopped. Some believe the city was never meant to be entered again, that it was a retreat, not for people fleeing war, but from something else, something older than language, something they couldn't destroy, only hide from deep underground. And the absence of entrances, that was intentional. A last line of defense against what? No one knows. But every time researchers return to review the findings, photographs, sketches, and journals, they are left with one unavoidable truth. Someone built a world beneath the world and then erased the path back to it. The monolith that shifts on its own. There's a place in the Siberian wilderness that most people have never heard of. It's not on tourist maps. It's not in many history books, but for those who study unexplained archaeological anomalies, it's one of the most haunting discoveries ever made. In the heart of the Yakutiya region, surrounded by dense forest and isolated valleys, stands a monolithic stone that has both puzzled and disturbed scientists for decades. It's not its size that surprises researchers. It's the fact that it moves. Locals have called it the shifting tooth for generations, believing the stone has a spirit of its own. Shepherds and hunters who pass by, it say the monolith is never in quite the same position when they return. They describe it as leaning slightly one year, upright the next, or angled in a completely different direction after winter snows thaw. And this isn't superstition alone. Soviet geologists during the 1960s took measurements and photographs of the monolith's position. When they returned 5 years later, the monolith had rotated nearly 7 degrees. No earthquake, no visible damage, no human interference, just a gradual, eerie, silent shift. The stone itself is an unusually shaped vertical pillar around 13 foot tall, made of a mineral composition not common in the region. Some say it was brought from far away, moved and planted deliberately. Others argue it may have been part of a much larger ancient structure now lost to time. The oddest thing is that the rock seems to rest without any solid foundation. Beneath, it is loose gravel and soft soil, completely unable to support the weight of such a massive stone over time without some movement. And yet, rather than sinking or toppling, it appears to pivot gently as if it is adjusting itself. There's no formal record of its origin, no carvings, no inscriptions, but its presence has been quietly studied by a handful of independent Russian archaeologists. They have found signs of metallic residues beneath the base of the stone, as though some mechanism had once been embedded underneath. But the materials are so degraded that testing yields no clear answers. What makes the mystery deeper is the oral history of the indigenous Avani people. According to their traditions, the shifting tooth was once the marker of a powerful place, not just a sacred one. It was said to cover the entrance to a buried chamber that could only be opened once every 600 years when the stars aligned. The stone, they say, moves to mark that alignment. Skeptics have tried to explain it away. Maybe frost heave, where frozen ground expands and contracts, pushes the stone around slowly, but even that doesn't account for its regular tilting and rotation in measurable angles. It's not tumbling or falling. It's moving in a way that seems intentional, like a slow, deliberate repositioning. One study attempted to place time-lapse cameras in the area, but they failed after a few weeks due to battery failure and interference. Satellite data from overhead shows strange electromagnetic readings near the site, minor but consistent. It's almost as if something beneath the stone generates a small but persistent field of energy, and yet no one has dug below it. Permission to excavate in Yakutia is difficult to obtain, especially in sacred territories. Indigenous leaders have refused to allow any deep disturbance of the land, so the monolith stands alone, quiet, slowly adjusting over time. Theories range from natural processes to magnetic fields to remnants of ancient machinery. Some fringe researchers have even proposed that the monolith may be a kind of compass or even a dormant device placed by an advanced civilization that once inhabited the region long before the Ice Age. Whatever it is, the stone doesn't give up its secrets easily. It stands in silence through every season like a guardian of a forgotten era. And as modern science struggles to explain its behavior, the legend of the shifting tooth continues to grow. It's another reminder that even in our hyper-connected satellite-mapped world, there are places and objects that defy our understanding. The Earth is old, far older than most people realize. And scattered across it are stories not written in books, but etched into the landscape, waiting for someone to notice. And perhaps this stone is not just a mystery, but a sign that some knowledge, some forgotten precision, once existed and may still be watching the coins that shouldn't exist. It started as a routine excavation. Nothing unusual, just a team of archaeologists working quietly near a riverbank in the Japanese prefecture of Okinawa. The site was known to contain remnants of early Japanese settlements, pottery fragments, old wells, and foundations of wooden houses that had long decayed. Everything was going according to plan until one of the workers brushed away a clump of soil and saw a small round object glinting in the sunlight. It was a coin. That in itself wasn't surprising. Coins turn up in many digs. But as the team cleaned it gently and examined the markings, confusion settled in. It was not Japanese. It was not Asian. In fact, it wasn't even remotely close to any coin native to the region. What they held in their hands was unmistakably Roman. This made no sense. Roman coins dated to the 3rd and 4th centuries, discovered in a Japanese site with no recorded Roman contact, no known Roman trade route, and no reason whatsoever for their presence. At first, the team thought it was a mistake. Maybe the coin had been dropped there recently by a traveler, a tourist. But as they continued to excavate, they found more. Not one, not two, but 10 Roman coins buried beneath a solid layer of sediment that had not been disturbed in over 1,000 years. This layer predated European contact with Japan by centuries. Researchers were baffled. The coins were real, authentic Roman currency made of copper and bronze, and one in particular bore the image of Emperor Constantine, all dated to the Roman Empire's late period. Yet there were no trade routes that connected Rome to Japan. There's no mention in Roman records of any ventures that far east. And the Japanese chronicles from that time period, very detailed in their own right, do not mention the arrival of any European visitors. So how did the coins get there? Some suggested they could have been brought over by Chinese merchants who may have traded with Westerners and then carried them further east. Others speculated that a shipwreck could have deposited artifacts onshore after centuries drifting in the Pacific. But the location of the site deep inland, far from any historic coastline, makes that explanation less likely. A more controversial theory emerged from a few independent researchers. They proposed that the coins were part of an ancient and undocumented voyage, one possibly made by a lost ship or a lone group of travelers who made it much further than history remembers. Some even speculated the coins were heirlooms passed down for generations, their origin long forgotten, eventually buried with someone who had no idea what they truly were. But then the story got stranger. In another excavation, this time on a small island south of Japan, 1,000 kilometers away, archaeologists uncovered coins that looked nearly identical to the Okinawa finds. Again, Roman, again, dated centuries before any European contact with Japan. The coins appeared to be from the same batch, showing similar wear patterns, suggesting they had traveled together before being separated and lost to time. No one could explain it. It became known quietly in archaeological circles as the Okinawan Roman enigma. A few papers were written, but mainstream historians dismissed it as a curiosity, not a rewriting of history, but the evidence remains. Coins that should never have made it across Asia, let alone the vast Pacific Ocean, are buried under layers of earth that confirm they arrived long before modern contact. Could there have been a forgotten exchange between East and West, a journey erased from history by storms, conflict, or simply time? Or could it be that our understanding of ancient trade networks, navigation capabilities, and cultural exchange is far more limited than we like to admit? These are not questions easily answered. The coins sit today in a museum display case, quiet and still behind protective glass. But their presence whispers something far louder. That history might be more interconnected than we've ever imagined. That civilizations once thought separate may have brushed against each other in brief, undocumented encounters, leaving behind just enough to make us wonder. And perhaps that's the most haunting part of all, that we're only catching glimpses of a world that once was. Pieces of a puzzle scattered by time, hinting that the story of our past is still very incomplete, and the only way to know the truth is to keep digging. The Coptic Handbook of Ritual Power. In a quiet, temperature-controlled room at a museum in Australia, behind a layer of protective glass rests a book so strange that even seasoned historians hesitate before drawing conclusions about its origin. It's not thick, just 20 pages, and yet it's one of the most confounding relics ever uncovered from the sands of Upper Egypt. They call it the Coptic Handbook of Ritual Power, a name that sounds like fiction, but is completely real. The manuscript dates back to somewhere between the 7th and 8th centuries. Adi, what you're looking at, if you ever get the rare chance, is not some mythical grimoire written by a magician in secret. It is a very real text inscribed by someone who deeply believed in what they were writing. And even more strangely, some of those rituals sound eerily practical. At the front of the handbook, you'll find dense lines of complex prayers. They don't read like casual blessings or generic mantras. Instead, they're intentionally structured incantations stitched together with very specific instructions. Flip further, and you'll find the spell work. Not the kind you'd imagine from fantasy novels, but deeply rooted in ancient Coptic spiritual practices. One such spell promises healing for a disease known back then as leptospirosis. The cure: drive 2 nails into a door frame. Nails that had prayers whispered into the moments before. But it reveals something bigger. A people trying to combine faith, medicine, and survival into one simple act. There's a strange intimacy in that. It wasn't about summoning lightning or transforming lead into gold. This handbook was about daily life, about protecting children, healing the sick, driving away bad luck, and maybe even just feeling like you had a little more control over an uncontrollable world. And yet, what makes this artifact so mysterious isn't just the rituals. It's how the book surfaced before landing in the hands of Michael Fasselman, a collector of rare manuscripts. Its entire history is blank. No records, no lineage, just a sudden appearance like the book simply walked into modern history and sat down waiting to be noticed. Since 1981, it's been in the same Australian museum, locked away, safe, studied, but its spells haven't been forgotten. Scholars believe it originated from a small Christian sect that may have blended older pagan ideas into their rituals. But the text doesn't name its authors. There are no signatures, no context about its purpose beyond what's inside. Some even argue the book may have been a teaching tool, while others believe it was more personal, an individual's own. Spell Journal. What's especially strange is how the prayers transition. They start off orderly, methodical, but by page 15, the language begins to fragment. Not in grammar, but in tone, less formal, less polished, almost like the person writing it was beginning to drift into something deeper or maybe something darker. Why was it written? Was it ever used? Could it have been copied from something older, something lost? No one knows. What's certain is that the Coptic Handbook of Ritual Power is real. You can hold it, though few ever will. And yet what it reveals about our ancestors might be more surprising than its contents. That for all our modern advancements, the ancient need for meaning, control, and healing still lives in us. The cave that heals, but no one knows why. In the quiet hills of northern Romania, tucked away beneath layers of thick forest and untouched earth, there lies a cave that science still struggles to explain. It's called Mobile Cave, and for decades, barely anyone knew it existed. There were no tourist signs pointing to it, no legends that made it into storybooks. For thousands of years, it remained sealed off in the surface world, completely cut off from air, sunlight, and even the water above ground. It wasn't until 1986, just months after the Chernobyl disaster, that a team of scientists searching for a location to build a power plant accidentally drilled down and opened the entrance. And what they found inside stunned them, because this was no ordinary cave. At first, the conditions inside seemed absolutely deadly. The air was thick with toxic gases, high levels of carbon dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, gases that should have made the place uninhabitable. The water was dark. The walls were coated with slime. Oxygen was scarce, barely a third of what we breathe on the surface. But despite that, the cave wasn't empty. It was teeming with life. Inside Mobile Cave, scientists found an entire ecosystem unlike anything ever seen before. Dozens of species that had never existed anywhere else on Earth. Strange. Insects, blind spiders, translucent worms, creatures that had evolved in complete isolation, without sunlight, without plants, without the entire food chain we take for granted. Instead of photosynthesis, life in this cave relied on chemosynthesis, a process fueled by sulfur-loving bacteria that fed off the toxic gases rising from the Earth's crust. These bacteria formed the base of the food web, and everything else adapted around them. But the mystery of Marvel Cave goes deeper than its strange creatures, because over the years, something even more bizarre began to circulate among those who visited. A whisper that time spent in the cave, even just minutes, had strange effects on the human body. Some researchers reported feeling sharper. Their skin seemed to heal faster from small cuts. Their chronic ailments eased. Some even claimed it helped with arthritis or asthma or nerve pain. At first, these were dismissed as coincidences. But then came the studies. When a team from Germany visited the cave to test its bacteria and air quality, they noted a peculiar pattern. Certain microbes in the cave walls were not only unique, they secreted bioactive compounds, ones that seemed to inhibit harmful bacteria, even some that were antibiotic resistant. In other words, this toxic cave, which should be deadly, might actually contain life-saving organisms. The ecosystem inside Mobile Cave had spent millions of years evolving defenses against harsh extreme conditions, and in doing so, It may have unlocked chemical pathways that modern medicine hasn't even begun to understand. Still, scientists tread carefully. The cave is fragile. Its air isn't safe for long exposure, and no one is allowed to enter without full protective suits. A single breath of the wrong gas could knock someone unconscious. A few more, and you'd never make it out. Yet, despite the risks, the cave continues to pull people in. Because the idea that deep underground, sealed off for millions of years, there exists a completely different version of life, one that thrives in poison, one that may even heal us, is something that science can't easily ignore. What makes it more haunting is that we still don't know how deep it goes. Only a small portion of Mole Cave has been explored. Many chambers remain untouched. The further you go, the more dangerous the gases become. And yet, the signs of life continue. Is it possible that even more powerful compounds or even unknown forms of intelligence lie deeper within? No one knows. And so, the cave waits, silent, breathing its toxic breath, nurturing secrets beneath the rock and water. It doesn't invite us in, but it doesn't stop us either. And as scientists prepare the next expeditions, protected in suits carrying oxygen tanks, they can't help but feel like visitors in a place not meant for them. A place that evolved without us. A place that reminds us just how little we truly understand. Not just about our planet, but about life itself. Because sometimes the most powerful mysteries aren't the ones written in books or buried in temples. Sometimes they're still alive, right beneath our feet. The wall that bleeds every spring, tucked away in the hills of southeastern Turkey, not far from ancient settlements that predate cities. There's a structure that confounds both scientists and locals. It's not grand in size. It isn't carved with mythical animals or towering over a sacred site. It's a stone wall half sunken into the earth, worn by weather and cracked by time. But what it does has never been explained. Because every year during the final weeks of spring, like clockwork, the stones begin to bleed. Locals call it the crying wall. And the phenomenon has been happening for as long as anyone can remember. Reddish streaks begin to appear on the surface of the stones, spreading slowly down the wall, as if some ancient wound is opening. By midsummer, the streaks dry, fade, and vanish, only to return the following year. Geologists were the first to investigate it seriously in the 1980s. Some thought it might be iron oxide in the stones, reacting to seasonal humidity. Others proposed it was a rare combination of underground minerals seeping through pores in the rock. But none of those explanations held up because the same stones from the wall, when removed and relocated, stopped bleeding. The phenomenon only occurs when the stones remain embedded in their original alignment, stacked, ancient, and untouched. Even more strangely, the bleeding is not uniform. Only the southern-facing side reacts, and only between late April and early July. And the streaks, they're not just surface stains. Samples have shown that the red fluid has high iron content, but also contains organic trace elements usually found in animal tissue. Not blood, but something uncannily close. Not rust, but not entirely mineral either. One team went so far as to suggest microbial life could be at play. Ancient bacteria reacting to light, temperature, and underground moisture to produce the red fluid, but they couldn't reproduce it in lab conditions. Nor could they find the source. To this day, no pipe, no spring, and no geological fault line has been found beneath or around the wall. It simply bleeds, and then it stops. This has led to a host of local legends. Some say the wall marks the edge of a battlefield older than recorded history, where giants or spirits once fought and bled into the ground. Others believe the wall is cursed, built as a barrier by a forgotten people who try to seal something in or out. The blood, they say, is a warning. What lends these stories weight is the age of the wall itself. Unlike modern construction, there's no mortar. The stones are dry stacked, shaped perfectly to fit together like puzzle pieces using a technique archaeologists associate with megalithic architecture. That means the wall could be over 8,000 years old, predating even Gobekli, which sits just 200 kilometers to the west. But there's something else. When ground-penetrating radar was used to scan beneath the wall, archaeologists found the outline of a buried chamber, deep, sealed, and unreachable. They have no idea what's inside. No one has opened it, because the terrain is unstable, and perhaps because no one wants to find out what might still lie buried under the wall. That bleeds. Some scientists argue it's coincidence, an unexplained but natural reaction. Others are quietly obsessed, returning year after year to collect more data, still looking for the moment where chemistry, biology, and history intersect. But the villagers who have lived near the wall for generations do not need an explanation. Every spring, when the wall begins to streak with red once again, they gather in silence and wait. They don't touch it. They don't try to stop it. They simply watch and remember, because in their eyes, the wall is not malfunctioning. It's remembering. And in that slow, red weeping, it is telling us something we haven't yet learned how to read. The stone map with no known origin. There are some discoveries so far removed from our modern understanding of the past that even seasoned archaeologists hesitate to interpret them. Deep in the mountains of Russia, where the terrain is steep and silent, an artifact was discovered that simply should not exist. Not because it is ancient or fragile or even misplaced, but because of what it shows and how it shows it. A stone slab unlike anything else ever uncovered. A map, but not just a map in the sense we think of today. This slab appears to show something with precision that shouldn't have been known at the time it was created. Something that seems to challenge our most basic assumptions about what ancient people could measure, could chart, or could even see. The object in question was found in the early 1990s near the village of Chandar in the Ural Mountains. A team of researchers led by Professor Alexander Shuvarov from Bashir State University had been conducting studies on ancient Chinese migration patterns. But their attention was pulled in a different direction when local residents mentioned strange stone slabs in the mountains. Slabs that seemed to bear inscriptions, even images carved deeply and deliberately into the surface. Most had been lost, broken, or buried, but one in particular remained mostly intact. What they uncovered was staggering. Roughly 5 feet tall, 4 feet wide, and weighing over a ton. The stone was no simple rock. It was a detailed topographic map, carved with uncanny accuracy. Hills, valleys, rivers, and even a system of channels and dams, all represented in 3 dimensions. According to the researchers, the map reflected a region of the Ural Mountains with almost exact precision down to minor changes in elevation and geological features. Now, here's where the mystery takes hold. The level of detail present on the slab would have required knowledge that supposedly was only possible after the development of aerial photography or satellite imaging. Yet, this slab was no modern creation. Carbon dating, although complicated due to the materials involved, suggested an age of around 100 million years, and that alone launched it from a curious artifact into something impossible. How could this be? If the dating is accurate, the implications are enormous. At 100 million years old, the slab predates not just human civilization, but humanity itself. Even if we consider that an error, even if we pull the date back drastically to say 10,000 years ago, it still doesn't make sense. At no point in known history did ancient humans have access to the kind of overhead imagery or advanced cartographic tools that would allow for this level of accuracy. And yet, here it was. The stone is composed of 3 layers. The base is dolomite, a sturdy rock often used as a building material. The middle layer, which contains the map, is a dioxide glass porcelain, a material not naturally occurring and extremely difficult to replicate, even with modern technology. And the top layer is a thin protective coating, possibly made of calcium ceramic compound, to preserve the engravings beneath. All of this points to a level of engineering and material knowledge not commonly attributed to any ancient civilization. But there's more. Embedded within the carvings were strange inscriptions, symbols not resembling any known language. Shavero, Ankh, S-Team originally suspected an ancient form of Chinese or possibly a forgotten Siberian dialect. But the symbols resisted all interpretation. No match was found. No cultural reference point could be tied to them. They didn't look like letters. They didn't look like mathematical symbols, but they were too deliberate to be random. Some have theorized that this could be an example of an ancient language of geometry, a way to encode knowledge that doesn't rely on words, but on shapes, angles, and position. A system meant not to be spoken, but to be understood visually, like a blueprint or a code. If that's the case, it would mark a completely different way of thinking and recording information. Now, let's slow down here and just reflect. You're laying in bed, your eyes half closed, your room quiet. But imagine this. Someone or something H100 read million years ago, or even just 10,000 years ago, taking the time to carve a perfect three-dimensional map into a stone, layer it like a modern engineer would, and leave it in a place where no one was supposed to find it. What was the purpose? Was it a message, a monument, a relic of forgotten knowledge? Or was it not even meant for us? Theories began to pour in. Some proposed that the slab is evidence of a lost civilization, one so advanced it had already mapped the earth before we had cities, before we had roads, before we had language as we know it. Others suggest something even stranger. The slab is alien in origin, created by visitors from another world who had a reason to survey the earth from above. That would explain the unusual materials, the layered design, and the map's impossible detail. Of course, mainstream archaeologists hesitate to go that far. There are many questions. Could the slab be a hoax? A modern creation passed off as an ancient mystery? Possible, yes. But no one has stepped forward to claim it. And the resources needed to create something so complex and then to hide it in the mountains for decades or centuries make that explanation feel. What we're left with is this: a heavy stone too advanced for its time, showing features of the earth in a way we shouldn't have been able to see, and no clear idea where it came from, who made it, or why. Shaver have called it the Dashka stone, possibly after a family member, but others have simply taken to calling it what it feels like, the map that shouldn't exist. It was briefly displayed in a university setting, then quietly removed. Some say due to lack of funding, others suspect pressure from scientific institutions, not willing to entertain such wild possibilities. There have been calls to conduct further studies, but access to the slab has been restricted. For now, it sits out of public view, one of those mysteries that almost seems too bizarre to be real. And yet, it is real. The carving exists. The location it maps exists. The questions it raises remain unanswered. As you drift deeper into thought, or perhaps even towards sleep, remember this. We walk in a world that holds secrets beneath every hill, behind every cave, under every ocean. And every now and then, one of those secrets surfaces just long enough to make us wonder if our version of history is only a fraction of the real story. In the quiet of the night, in the softness of these mysteries, let your imagination go where science cannot yet follow. Because sometimes the past isn't behind us. It's hidden beneath us, waiting to be found. The underground machine that shouldn't be there. There's a story, one that doesn't often make the front page of scientific journals. A story that emerged not from legend or rumor, but from deep beneath the Earth's surface. Not in a cave or tomb, but from inside solid rock, untouched by humans for tens of millions of years. What was found has puzzled researchers, sparked wild theories, and quietly faded into the background of archaeologists' most unexplainable mysteries. It happened in 1938. A small coal mine in the Ukrainian region of Donetsk was operating as usual. The workers were digging, extracting coal as they had for years. The environment was noisy, hot, and uneventful. But then something caught their attention. Embedded in one of the coal seams buried within rock estimated to be about 300 million years old was something that didn't belong there. A metallic object, not just a lump of or a random piece of mineral, but something shaped, something geometric, something that looked manufactured. The workers stopped what they were doing. They examined it, and what they saw left them speechless. A cylinder, not massive, not heavy, but unmistakably artificial. Its surface was smooth, and the ends were perfectly circular. And it wasn't alone. As they continued to examine the surrounding rock, they discovered more. Several of these metallic cylinders embedded deep within the coal. This coal seam had formed during the Carboniferous period, long before humans existed, long before dinosaurs even walked the earth. So, the question was immediate and obvious. How did these metal objects get inside 300 million-year-old rock? Now, it's easy to dismiss a story like this. People assume it was a mistake, misdated, misidentified, misunderstood. But that's not what the initial investigations found. Local scientists took samples. They analyzed the metal. It was an aluminum-magnesium alloy, something commonly used in modern aerospace manufacturing. But this was 1938. There were no aircraft factories near Donetsk. There was no reason and no explanation for how a metal of that type could have been found inside coal. The composition was unusual, almost too clean. Pure aluminum doesn't occur naturally in metallic form. It has to be extracted and processed, typically through advanced electrochemical methods. But that technology didn't exist hundreds of years ago, let alone hundreds of millions of years ago. So what could explain this? Some theorists jumped to conclusions. They suggested the object was part of an ancient machine, maybe something left behind by a pre-human civilization, or even an extraterrestrial probe that crashed and became entombed in layers of sediment over time. Others argued it might be a natural formation that only appeared artificial. But there was a problem with that. Nature doesn't build cylinders with identical dimensions. Nature doesn't forge alloys in perfect geometric shapes. There's no lava flow, no mineral deposit, no tectonic process known that can replicate precision engineering. And yet, this object seemed to check all the boxes of intentional manufacture. Over time, the object became known in fringe archaeology circles as the underground machine. The story would resurface occasionally, especially when similar finds were reported elsewhere, like the mysterious spheres found in South Africa, also embedded in ancient rock and made of nickel steel, or the iron hammer found in Texas inside Cretaceous stone. All of these discoveries suggest one thing. Someone or something was shaping metal long before humanity's timeline says it's possible. Of course, mainstream science avoids these conclusions. It's easier to assume contamination, misinterpretation, or outright hoax. But what makes the Donetsk find harder to ignore is the sheer depth of the coal seam. It hadn't been disturbed. The object wasn't lying on top of the coal. It was embedded within it. Solid rock had to be broken to retrieve it. Even if the dating were off by a few million years, the problem remains. The idea of machines, metalwork, or even complex tools existing before humans challenges everything we think we know. And here's where it gets stranger. According to workers at the mine, the metallic cylinders weren't just scattered randomly. They seemed to follow a pattern, a layout, as if they had once been part of a larger structure. Some describe them as nozzles or spindles, terms that make no sense in the context of natural geology. But could this be a clue? Could these objects be remnants of a buried mechanism? Some speculate they were parts of a drilling device, long forgotten and petrified by time. Others think they were components of a flying machine, one that crashed, was buried, and fossilized before the first mammals even existed. There's no conclusive evidence, no blueprint, no name etched on the surface to tell us what we're really looking at. But that lack of information only deepens the mystery. Because if it's not natural and it's not recent, then it must come from a part of our history that we've never recorded. Now, imagine you're one of the miners. You're underground, surrounded by rock older than time. You hit something unexpected. Not a fossil, not a bone, but metal. Something smooth and curved and impossibly out of place. You pull out. You turn it over in your hands. You know what coal is. You know it forms over ages. And yet, this object feels like it was made yesterday. Would you feel curious? Would you feel afraid? The story didn't make international headlines. It didn't inspire a global investigation. It was noted, studied quietly, and then archived. Another mystery filed away where it wouldn't disrupt the accepted timeline. But it exists, and there are more like it. Around the world, similar finds have been reported and forgotten. Small pieces of a puzzle that no one seems ready to solve. Ancient metal spheres, perfectly balanced tools that predate civilizations, impressions of gear-like. Shapes in fossilized rock, all pointing toward one unsettling possibility. That human history isn't the first. That we may be the latest in a series of intelligent life to rise and fall. Each time leaving behind traces buried just deep enough to be dismissed, or perhaps that we're not alone in shaping the Earth's past. So tonight, as you lie back and listen, let this mystery settle in your thoughts. Somewhere beneath your feet, miles down under stone formed before the first bird took flight, there may be machines, forgotten artifacts, evidence of intelligence older than memory. And the deeper we dig, the more likely we are to find something we were never supposed to know. The compass that points to nowhere. Sometimes it's the smallest artifacts that carry the deepest mysteries. Not giant temples, not crumbling cities, but a handheld object. Something once tucked into a traveler's cloak, forgotten for centuries, quietly waiting for someone to notice. It didn't behave like anything else. The artifact in question was found in 1912, buried beneath the soft soil of a windswept hill in central China. It wasn't large, only the size of a human palm. At first glance, it looked like a compass, the kind ancient traders or navigators might have carried centuries ago. A simple metal dial, a thin needle, a worn brass case. But the more researchers studied it, the stranger it became. It didn't point north. That was the first surprise. The needle didn't align with the Earth's magnetic field. Instead, it pointed slightly southeast toward a specific point deep within the Tibetan Plateau. Geologists ruled out magnetic anomalies in the area. The surrounding stones held no unusual mineral content. There was no interference. But the compass refused to behave like a compass should. It wasn't broken. It was consistent. Every test, every rotation, every attempt to reset, it only confirmed the same result. It was built to point somewhere else. At first, this seemed like a mistake. Maybe the builders didn't understand magnetism. Maybe it was ceremonial, symbolic, decorative. But then someone noticed something odd about the casing itself. Inside the lid, almost invisible beneath layers of corrosion, was a carved symbol, a star inside a circle. Beneath it, tiny markings that resembled coordinates, but they weren't written in any known script. Not Chinese, not Tibetan, not Sanskrit. The characters didn't match any known alphabet from the region. A linguist from Kyoto University later realized the markings had a mathematical pattern, something closer to binary code than traditional language. The same sequence repeated every 18 characters, not a message, a location, or maybe a frequency. That was the second clue. The third came from where the compass had been found. The nearby ruins, mostly buried now, were once part of an ancient trade stop along a forgotten branch of the Silk Road. Traders passed through, but few settled. It wasn't a major city, not a capital, but records show that for over 300 years, pilgrims and monks came here to rest on their way to a place they never wrote down. The destination was always left blank. It was as if they were going somewhere they didn't want others to follow. And then came the strangest part. When modern survey teams visited the exact location the compass pointed to, roughly 900 kilometers west, buried within a barren ridge near the Himalayan foothills, they found what they described as a silence that felt artificial. No birds, no wind, no insects, just stillness. And beneath that stillness, a deep, persistent hum, barely audible, not mechanical, not geological, a frequency just below human hearing, but still felt like standing beside a huge machine you can't see. They found no buildings, no ruins, only oddly shaped stones arranged in a circle, as if someone had long ago marked this place for a reason. The soil samples showed signs of extreme heat at some point in the distant past. The rocks themselves had unusual magnetic properties, but the source of the hum was never identified. To this day, No one has explained why the compass points to that place or who made it. One theory suggests it wasn't meant for navigation, but for memory. Think of it like this. What if someone in the distant past knew that the Earth's magnetic field shifts slowly over time? What if they encoded that knowledge into an object, not just to tell direction, but to mark a moment in the future? A magnetic timestamp waiting to sync with the planet's changes, waiting until it finally aligned with now. Another theory is more unsettling. Some researchers believe the compass points not to a location, but to a device, something buried deep below that Tibetan ridge. Something dormant, hidden, still emitting some kind of signal after all these centuries. A signal that maybe someone or something used to follow. The Chinese government eventually sealed off the site. No official explanation was given. Satellite imagery of the area became harder to obtain, and the compass itself. It quietly disappeared into a museum archive, not on display, not in any catalog, just gone. But the legend didn't stop there. Copies of the artifact, sketched and photographed before it vanished, have been circulated among independent researchers. Some believe the original design resembles ancient navigation tools found in both Mesopotamia and pre-Columbian South America, cultures that weren't supposed to know each other. Somehow separated by oceans, they seem to share an idea that direction wasn't just about geography, but something more, something cosmic. Even today, there are whispers in certain monasteries that speak of a silent hill that holds the sky's echo. No one knows what it means, but the stories keep pointing back to that same region, that same strange stillness. Some nights, when the air is clear and the wind is low, climbers near the ridge claim they can still feel that hum like a low vibration running through the bones of the earth. A reminder that something is there, waiting, still powered by something long forgotten. So what is the compass? A broken tool? A ritual object? A message from an ancient civilization more advanced than we're ready to admit? Or is it something else entirely? A signal left behind for whoever came next. We may never know, but one thing is certain. The moment you hold that compass, even a replica, and watch its needle shift away from north, it changes something. Because deep down, you realize it's not the Earth that's lost its way. It's us, the sealed door no one can open. In southern India, tucked deep within the grounds of an ancient temple complex that has stood for more than 1,000 years, there is a door. A large weathered archway sealed, completely shut. No hinges, no handles, just thick granite carved with serpent-like patterns and a symbol of something no one's quite been able to interpret. The locals call it padlocked by the gods. And to this day, despite modern technology, pressure tools, and even government-backed studies, no one has been able to open it. You'll find this doorway in the Shripad Manfaswamy Temple in Kerala, India. The temple itself is one of the most sacred and wealthiest religious sites in the world. Built in the Dravidian style, it is adorned with towering gopurams and intricate carvings that depict scenes from ancient Hindu scriptures. But beneath the gold-covered shrines and long stone corridors lies something far more mysterious. 6 underground chambers hidden behind iron gates and sealed archways. Most of them were opened in 2011 during a legal battle between the Temple Trust and the state. When researchers and officials stepped inside, what they found changed everything. Vaults stacked with gold coins from every known era, ornate. Jewelry, weapons, statues made of solid gold. Diamonds larger than any museum had ever displayed. The total worth was so vast, it couldn't be calculated. Some estimates put it over 20 billion. A treasure untouched for centuries, hidden just beneath the feet of passing worshippers. But one vault remains sealed. Vault B. No key, no opening mechanism, just a large granite door seemingly fused to the surrounding structure. According to local priests, the door is protected by a powerful naga, an ancient ritual said to bind the vault through sound-based vibrations, chants, and energy fields. And once sealed in this way, the door can only be opened by the same specific frequency from which it was closed. The catch? No one knows what that frequency is. When a court ordered Vault B to be opened in 2011, Temple authorities pushed back strongly. Not because they were trying to hide wealth, they said, but because they believed opening the door would bring immense misfortune. Priests referenced old palm leaf manuscripts that warned, only when the time is right and the voice of Garuda is heard shall the serpent unlock. That wasn't poetry. That was instruction. So experts tried other methods. Ground-penetrating radar showed that behind the door was a large open space, possibly another vault, maybe even a staircase. But the door refused to budge. Not to thermal cutting tools, not to drills, not to vibrations. And even when the Indian Supreme Court allowed partial inspections, Vault B remained untouched. One of the most advanced nations on Earth could not move a slab of stone from a structure over 1,000 years old. And so people began asking, what exactly is behind that door? Some believe it's simply more treasure hidden away during times of war. Others think it's something much older, something not meant for the public. Some legends go further. According to certain local traditions, the temple was not originally built as a place of worship. It was built as a containment structure, a place to bury or hold a celestial object, something that fell from the sky, something that the sages of the time believed could only be sealed away, never destroyed. The serpent carvings on the vault aren't decorative. They're protective. In Indian tradition, Nagas are not just snakes. They are guardians of deep knowledge, underground wisdom, and dangerous power. There are even stories of people long ago attempting to open the vault by force. They died within days, not of curses, but of sudden, unexplained illnesses. Their skin pale, their nerves failing, as if they had come into contact with something far beyond their biology's ability to handle. Scientists, of course, are skeptical of these accounts. They suggest maybe there's radioactive material sealed inside, or that ancient societies used primitive chemical traps, poison gas, mercury chambers, or pressure-based systems that would release deadly substances if breached. But if that were the case, wouldn't that show up in the scans? It didn't. There's something else. Something modern archaeology still hasn't answered. The exact alignment of the temple, Sri Padmanabhaswamy, isn't built randomly. It's positioned at a very specific angle to a star cluster that no longer rises directly above that location. When the temple was built, it aligned perfectly with Antares, a bright red star associated with serpents and guardianship in many ancient cultures from India to Babylon to Mesoamerica. But over time, due to the Earth's axial precession, the star shifted, and some scholars believe the vault can only be opened once the alignment returns, a moment that may be centuries, if not thousands of years away. Until then, Vault B sits in silence, waiting. Visitors still come to the temple. Some walk the outer perimeter, peeking past the gates toward that sealed arch. Others pause just long enough to wonder what kind of knowledge or warning might be trapped behind that door. But no one tries to open it anymore. Even the government has backed off, because maybe, just maybe, there are some places humans are not meant to enter yet. Maybe we are being asked to wait until we understand more, until we listen better, until we stop looking for treasure and start asking why it was hidden in the first place. So when you hear that there's a door in India no one can open, not for lack of trying, but for something deeper, it might not be just about locks or tools or chance. It might be about timing, because what's behind that door was never meant for now. The Whispering Stones of Nakasendo. There's a trail in Japan that once linked Kyoto to Tokyo, then called Edito. It was known as the Nakasendo, meaning the Central Mountain route. Unlike the coastal Takedo Road, Nakasendo carved its way through the rugged, mist-trapped Japanese Alps. Even today, much of this ancient trail remains untouched by modernity. Moss creeps across the cobbled paths, and tiny post towns, many over 400 years old, still cradle secrets in the folds of their wooden shutters. But nestled deep in a rarely tied forest section of the trail, past Mome and into the older, quieter districts, travelers and researchers have stumbled upon something unnerving. Scattered in groups, sometimes as if purposefully arranged, lie small stones, not just natural stones, but smooth-shaped ones, no larger than a clenched fist, resting on moss beds or leaning against tree roots. And if you're quiet, truly still, alone, and without movement, something strange begins to happen. The stones whisper. Many have described it as faint voices, too soft to comprehend, but unmistakably vocal. Others hear flutes. Some report gentle humming, always low, always nearby, yet always without an obvious source. The Japanese call them sasaeki ishi, or whispering stones. No signs point to them. No placards mark them as historical. And yet they've been there for as long as the locals can remember, and possibly long before. A Saito-based historian, Kinta Murayama, has collected accounts dating back to the early Edo period. In a travel journal from 1657, a merchant described how his companion became entranced by ghost voices in the woods and wandered off the path only to be found later muttering nonsense with a stone in his hand. In 1723, a monk wrote of stones that remember, stating that when he sat in silence, he could hear prayers echoing from generations past. He claimed the stones were repositories of spiritual residue, memories locked in matter. Modern scientists, curious but skeptical, visited the site with equipment. Infrasound was one explanation. Low frequency, sound below the range of human hearing that can cause feelings of unease. But the equipment picked up no such frequencies. Others proposed water trickling through the rocks beneath the surface. Again, nothing consistent, and the stones whispered even on dry days. One professor from Tokyo University brought in a geologist who confirmed that the stones were not native to the area. Some seemed volcanic in origin. Others appeared to be quartz-based. The oddity, there are no known sources for those specific types of rock in the surrounding mountains. So how did they get there? Some researchers believe they were brought intentionally, perhaps as part of a forgotten ritual. One local legend says that during the days of the samurai, families would speak their worries into a stone and leave it on the path as an offering to the spirits who protected travelers. Another version tells of a monk who imbued the stones with mantras to ward off evil spirits. Over time, those prayers became trapped, echoes bouncing for eternity. What deepens the mystery is the behavior of the stones themselves. They move, not dramatically, not quickly. But visitors who've returned weeks apart report that the stones have shifted. A cluster on one side of the trail will appear reformed on the other. A stone balanced precariously on a tree route somehow sits neatly beside a moss patch days later. Wild animals, earth tremors, unlikely. The placement is too precise, too curated. Some experiments were even done with trail cameras, motion sensors triggered by any movement. In over a dozen cases, the stones change positions without a single frame of footage showing it happening, as if whatever moved them didn't trigger the sensor or wasn't something our cameras could capture. But the strangest account comes from a writer who stayed overnight in the forest with permission. As dusk fell and the insects quieted, he began to hear the faint murmurs. Not constant, just waves of soft sound like the breeze through reeds. He wrote that at one point it seemed like the voices were speaking to him, asking questions he couldn't fully hear, but somehow understood. The next morning, he found a stone placed just outside his tent with a small line etched into it, a curved mark like a smile. He took it home, intending to study it. But over the next few weeks, he claimed his dreams were filled with voices, some urgent, some calming. He eventually returned the stone to the path, stating, "It didn't belong with me. It had a message I wasn't ready for. No official archaeological excavation has been done. The area is considered sacred by locals, and digging is forbidden. Even drones are discouraged. The whispers are not seen as a danger, but a reminder, a humbling echo of something old, something watching. Could these stones be part of an ancient spiritual system? Are they holding emotional energy, like ancient recording devices carved by intention rather than technology? Or is the answer more geological, rooted in minerals and vibrations we don't yet understand? Whatever the case, the whispering stones of Nakasendo remain a phenomenon that defies both science and superstition. And perhaps that's what makes them so haunting, because they speak not in ways we can record or explain, but in ways that reach something quieter within us, something primal. And so if you ever find yourself walking a mist-covered trail in the Japanese mountains, and you hear a sound when there should be silence, don't be alarmed. You might have wandered near the stones that whisper, but listen closely. They may be whispering your name. The lost circles beneath the ice. Some places seem to hold their breath forever. Tucked beneath the silence of Antarctica's frozen sheet lies something so baffling, so quietly out of place that most people still don't know it's even there. And maybe that's for the best. It all started in 2012 when a group of geophysicists conducting satellite thermal scans noticed strange patterns, perfect circular formations deep under the ice. These weren't surface marks caused by melting or snow shifts. No, these patterns were far below, beneath hundreds of meters of solid ancient ice. And they were symmetrical, circular, repeating, as if someone or something had built structures far below, long before Antarctica froze over. At first, the circles were brushed off as natural formations, maybe glacial pressure or ancient lava tubes that had collapsed in rings. But the more they scanned, the clearer the images became. Some of the circles measured over 300 m wide, and they weren't random. They appeared in geometric arrangements like a grid. And that's when things got strange. Several researchers, including Dr. Evan Hargrove from the University of Colorado, submitted papers suggesting that these could be the remnants of ancient man-made structures. The backlash was immediate. Colleagues dismissed it as science fiction. But Hargrove stood by his claims, stating that the thermal anomalies combined with magnetic readings suggested materials unlike typical geological formations, possibly even metals. The problem, no one could physically reach them. These circles lay beneath nearly 3,000 feet of ice in a region so remote, so inhospitable that even drones struggled to function in the bitter cold. But that didn't stop the speculation. Some linked the discovery to an old theory that Antarctica might have been ice-free just 10,000 to 12,000 years ago, a radical shift from mainstream timelines. If true, it would mean humans or some advanced civilization could have once lived there when the continent was green and habitable. Others went further. A few fringe researchers suggested the circles matched ancient layouts found in Sumerian ruins or even Plato's description of Atlantis, concentric rings with radial paths, forming a kind of lost city blueprint. But these ideas were pushed to the margins of science, buried in the noise. Yet quietly, governments took notice. In 2016, a joint team from the U.S. and New Zealand launched an unannounced mission to that very region. They used radar imaging, deep ice-penetrating sensors, and even a borehole drill, though none of the findings were ever publicly released. The official story was environmental research, but those familiar with the satellite data believe they were trying to get a closer look at what lay beneath those rings. Shortly after, a blanket ban was placed over that sector of the Antarctic Treaty Zone. Flights were no longer permitted to pass directly above it. Even scientific teams were quietly rerouted. And yet, the circles remained there, unexplained, undisturbed, and colder than death. What makes it even more mysterious is that those same circular patterns, those buried rings, have started to show up elsewhere. In 2019, a scanning satellite over Greenland picked up similar formations under a layer of permafrost, again, in perfect geometric repetition. This pattern now appears to stretch across ancient polar zones from northern Canada to the buried edges of Siberia. It's as if some forgotten global pattern was etched into the earth and then frozen in place by time itself. We're not talking about ancient civilizations building stone monuments here. We're talking about the possibility that entire infrastructures, massive circular complexes, existed long before our current understanding of human history even begins. And no one knows who built them or why. Some speculate these were energy structures, designed to harness geothermal or electromagnetic forces. Others say they were massive gathering centers or even vaults built to survive some ancient cataclysm that wiped them out. But here's what chills researchers most. In certain satellite scans, just faint enough to question, but clear enough to notice, some of the circles appear to glow. Not in a dramatic movie-style way, but subtly faintly emitting heat signatures not consistent with surrounding ice. Like something beneath them is still faintly active, still running, still waiting. The scientific community remains silent on it. Most dismiss the idea before it's even finished being asked. Pareidolia, they say, the human brain seeing patterns where none exist. Glacial deformation or thermal reflection artifacts. They throw words at it, but the shapes remain. So do the whispers. There are no excavation plans, no missions announced, just an old continent buried in silence. And beneath that silence, perfect circles that no natural process can fully explain. It's possible they'll melt away before we ever get close enough to understand them. Or maybe they were never meant to be uncovered. Maybe the ice was always their protector or their lock. But if the ice ever does give way, and those circles are found to be more than just formations, we may be forced to rewrite everything. Not just about human history, but about Earth itself. Who walked it before us, what they knew, what they left behind. Until then, the circles wait, and the ice holds its breath. The forbidden tomb sealed by sound. There's a tomb deep in the sands of Central Asia that no one has entered in over 2,000 years. Not because it's hidden, not because it's buried, but because it was designed intentionally to never be opened. Archaeologists found it by accident in the Takan Desert, an ancient Silk Road corridor now almost entirely swallowed by dunes. The area is remote, desolate, and so dry that bodies buried there centuries ago often emerge naturally mummified. But what drew attention wasn't a body. It was a stone chamber, perfectly square, sealed from all sides with no visible doors. At first glance, it didn't even look like a tomb, more like a geometric artifact left in the middle of nowhere. But ground scans revealed something strange. A cavity inside roughly the size of a large room. And in the very center of that room, an object unidentified, perfectly spherical, and highly reflective. Even stranger were the sound pattern. When wind moved across the surface of the tomb, low-frequency hums vibrated through the ground. At first, it was dismissed as wind noise, but the hums formed patterns, repeating tones that scientists began to measure in exact frequencies. It was as if the tomb responded to the wind in a precise, almost mechanical way. When researchers tried to drill into the outer stone, their equipment malfunctioned, not jammed or overheated, just stopped. The resonance from the tools caused feedback loops in their electronics. One engineer claimed his digital watch reset itself to zero the moment he got within 3 m of the wall. So they tried another approach, ultrasonic imaging. The scans showed that the entire tomb chamber was suspended, floating within a kind of stone casing connected by a network of what appeared to be tension joints, almost like the whole structure had been tuned, like a massive instrument. If disturbed, the chamber might collapse in on itself or emit a frequency strong enough to destroy anything nearby. One linguist who analyzed the layout noticed something familiar. The internal layout of the tomb mimicked an ancient Sagdian character for silence, a shape only, found in manuscripts used for ceremonial rituals. These manuscripts were not about prayer, but containment, controlling something or someone. Some began to speculate that the chamber was never a burial site, that it wasn't built to honor the dead, but to trap them, not in a spiritual sense, but through vibration. The sound waves inside the tomb might have been designed to suppress something. The spherical object inside might be the key or the lock, but the inscriptions on the outer stone, barely legible due to erosion, translate loosely to one phrase, repeated 3 times, "Do not break the silence." When news of the tomb reached global circles, several private groups expressed interest in funding an excavation, but the government sealed off the site in 2009. Since then, no new images or data have been released. The official reason, risk of structural collapse. But those who worked on the site remember other details. One worker claimed that when he pressed his ear against the tomb at night, he heard what sounded like breathing, not wind, but deep, slow exhales from inside. Another described how birds avoided the area completely. Not a single feather within a kilometer radius. In 2015, A French researcher tried to recreate the resonance frequencies recorded at the site using a sound chamber in Lion. What happened next was subtle but disturbing. All the cameras monitoring the chamber failed, not broke, just stopped recording. The files were wiped clean. And afterward, the team, 4 researchers in total, reported persistent headaches, vivid dreams, and feelings of being followed. The experiment was never repeated. To this day, the tomb remains unentered, not for lack of interest, but because everyone who gets close enough seems to walk away with the same conclusion. Some doors weren't meant to open. Some structures were never built for the living. And some silences are not the absence of sound, but the sound itself, waiting patiently to be broken. So the tomb remains sealed, resting in the dunes, vibrating softly in the wind, as if humming a song that no one dares to. Finish. The road beneath the ice. There's a place where the earth holds its breath. A forgotten path buried, not in sand or stone, but sealed beneath miles of ancient ice. Not many know about it. Fewer still believe it exists. But for the small group of scientists who uncovered the clues, it changed everything we thought we knew about the ancient world. It begins in Greenland. In 2018, a glaciologist working near the Iowa Glacier detected an anomaly below the surface, something far too structured to be natural. At first, they believed it was an asteroid impact crater, possibly one of the largest ever recorded. But the more data they gathered, the more confusing it became. Radar scans showed not a single point of impact, but a series of lines perfectly straight, too perfect. It looked like a road beneath nearly a mile of ice. Experts from Denmark and Germany joined the investigation. They used ground-penetrating radar to map out the area in higher detail. What they found made them pause. The lines didn't just run parallel. They intersected, forming a grid, a system. They'd found what looked like a buried network of roads, shaped very much like the layout of an ancient city. Only there's no record of any civilization in Greenland at that time. The ice sheet is at least 12,000 years old, which would mean whatever is down there, if it's real, would predate the Egyptian pyramids, Stonehenge, and even Gobekli. That doesn't make sense, at least not in our current version of history. One of the scientists proposed a radical theory. What if Greenland wasn't always frozen? Geological records show the climate has shifted dramatically in the past. Some researchers now believe that parts of Greenland might have once been temperate, inhabitable, even lush. And if that's true, then maybe the people who live there left something behind. But here's where it gets even stranger. A second team analyzing deep ice cores taken near the site discovered unusual particles trapped in the ancient ice. Traces of carbon, bronze, and even microscopic fragments of glass. Materials typically associated with human industry or advanced fire-based processes. But these layers were buried so deep that they dated back more than 13,000 years. These findings didn't match any known human civilization from that era. They tried to drill deeper, but machinery would fail near the same depth every time. Not freeze, not break, just stop. No explanation. The readings would glitch, GPS would fail, even compasses would drift off course. As if some force didn't want them to. Go further, rumors began to spread among the research teams. One engineer claimed he heard a low hum coming from the ground while working alone near the edge of the anomaly. A sound so low it felt more than heard, he described it as a kind of pulse, like the ice itself was alive. Remembering something, when news of the site quietly leaked into academic circles, a few fringe historians proposed a startling hypothesis that we may be looking at remnants of a civilization that existed before the Younger Dryas, a period of sudden global cooling that began around 12,800 years ago. Some even dare to say it could be what's left of a lost chapter in humanity's story, a chapter wiped clean by cataclysm. The official reports, however, remain vague. The site is now classified under climate study. Access is heavily restricted. Satellite images have been scrubbed or altered to hide the grid patterns, and most public F-facing papers refer to the anomaly only in passing, never discussing the possibility of structures. But one document, an internal briefing not meant for public release, described the formation beneath the glacier with 3 words: unnaturally geometric alignment. Since then, the area has remained untouched. No more drilling, no more studies. The last team left the site in 2021, and yet the anomaly is still there, beneath the ice, waiting. A road that leads to nowhere, or maybe to a place too old for memory, too strange for record, and too dangerous to explore. The lost Oracle Stone of Atri. There's a small town in Italy, often forgotten even by those who live nearby. It's called Atri, perched in the hills of the Abruzzo region. It's known today for its quiet charm and olive groves. But long before any of that, long before the Romans or the medieval walls, Atri was home to a legend. A legend about a stone that could speak. Not in the way we understand speech, of course. It didn't shout. It didn't chant, but it answered. And what made it stranger? It was always right. The story begins not with a myth, but with a discovery. In 1998, a local construction team digging near the Cathedral of Santa Maria Asa came across a buried chamber. It was small, sealed, and unusually dry. Inside, they found artifacts, clay tablets with inscriptions, remains of offerings, and most notably, a circular slab of black basalt stone nearly 6 feet in diameter, smooth as glass. Etched into its surface were lines of unknown symbols, spirals, and what appeared to be constellations. At first, it was dismissed. Many thought it might be a Roman sundial or some kind of religious altar. But when archaeologists arrived and carbon dated the surrounding materials, the dates didn't match up. The chamber had been built nearly 900 years before the Romans ever arrived. Sometime around 1300 BC, that changed everything. The inscriptions baffled experts. They didn't match Latin, Greek, or even Etruscan. One linguist from the University of Florence noted that the writing resembled no known language, but seemed to follow a pattern as if it was built for rhythm or even spoken aloud. And when locals were asked, the old families of Atri spoke of a story. One rarely told any more about the Whispering Stone. According to legend, people would enter the chamber alone. They would sit across from the stone, place both palms flat on its surface, and ask a question, always a yes or no question, and somehow they would leave knowing the answer. The decision would appear in their minds like a thought that wasn't theirs. Travelers supposedly came from distant lands to ask the stone about war, about love, about birth and death. What makes this mystery more than just folklore is how meticulously the chamber was designed. The acoustics, for example, are uncanny. A whisper in one corner of the chamber carries perfectly to the opposite side. Tests done with modern microphones revealed something even more unsettling. Low-frequency hums, barely audible yet constant. Some speculated that the stone itself was carved to vibrate, possibly reacting to the human touch. One researcher, Dr. Emilia Rocca, who spent over a year studying the artifact, found that when pressure was applied, like the weight of 2 hands, very faint magnetic readings emerged. The readings weren't strong enough to be harmful, but they were precise. So precise, in fact, that they mirrored the Earth's magnetic field patterns during solstice alignments. Could it be that the stone answered by triggering subtle sensations in the human nervous system? It was speculative, but not impossible. The stone was eventually moved to a climate-controlled lab for preservation. But after being removed from its chamber, the responses stopped. Visitors who touched it no longer felt anything. No tingling, no visions, no fotis. The mystery died in silence. But the chamber remains, and that's where things become even stranger. In 2020, a group of acoustic archaeologists used sound mapping technology to recreate what the room once sounded like in ancient times. They discovered that at specific frequencies, especially those generated by human voices in deep registers, the room produced standing wave patterns. These could create the sensation of being surrounded by sound, even when it came from a single point. The whispers perhaps were never voices at all, but natural echoes designed to feel alive. Was this an ancient oracle, a technological experiment, or a spiritual tool meant to mimic divine presence? No one knows for sure, but many now believe the lost Oracle Stone of Atri was more than ritual. It was intentional, a machine in the simplest ancient form, not built with wires or steel, but with sound stone and belief. The people of Atri don't talk about the stone much anymore. Most have never seen it, but every so often someone still leaves a candle near the chamber. And locals say if you walk by late at night when the wind is still and the air is cold, you might hear something inside. A whisper, not loud, not clear, but there's something old that never stopped answering. The city beneath the sand, Ubar, Atlantis of the desert. In the heart of the Arabian Peninsula, where the desert stretches endlessly and the wind moves the dunes like waves on the sea, there lies a silence so deep it feels ancient. This silence has hidden many things, but in one part of this vast emptiness, the sands once concealed something remarkable, a place spoken of for thousands of years, a city some believed to be a myth swallowed by time. They called it Ubar, sometimes called the Atlantis of the sands. Ubar has been mentioned in old Arabic texts, and even in the Quran as of the Pillars, a city of great wealth ruled by a proud people who defied the heavens. Legend said it was destroyed in a single night, buried beneath the sands as punishment for its arrogance. But for generations, no one could prove it had ever existed. There were no ruins, no broken walls, no scattered relics, just desert. Then in the early 1990s, something shifted, literally. A team of researchers using satellite imaging, part of a NASA project at the time, noticed old caravan trails converging in a remote part of Oman. These were ancient trade routes used for transporting frankincense, a precious resin once worth more than gold. The lines in the desert pointed to a central hub, a crossroads long buried. A dig was launched cautiously with low expectations, but what they found stunned the world. Beneath layers of sand and collapsed terrain, the expedition unearthed foundations, pottery, tools, and signs of complex irrigation systems. Stone pillars lay cracked and half-buried. These were not the remains of a temporary camp or a scattered village. This had once been a thriving city designed to last. They named the site Sure, but many still called it Ubar. Whether this was truly the mythical city or just one of its outposts remains debated, but what mattered more was this. The story wasn't fiction. Geologists studying the area discovered something even more mysterious. The entire city had been built on a massive limestone cavern. Over centuries, this underground chamber slowly weakened. One night it collapsed. Just like that, the ground gave way. Buildings, streets, people swallowed by the earth. The collapse created a sinkhole so large it reshaped the landscape. And over time, the desert winds buried what remained. There was no war, no fire, just nature reclaiming what was built at top fragile ground. But the mystery doesn't end with geology. Artifacts found at the site included incense burners, trade bead from as far away as India, and ceramics with strange markings that don't match any known script. Some of these items predate any organized city building in that region by centuries. That led some to suggest that Ubar may have risen and fallen more than once, part of a much older cycle of desert civilizations long forgotten. There are also oral traditions still told by Bedouin elders of time when the ground hummed beneath the city. They say the earth beneath Ubar wasn't stable, that it sang in a low tone at night, a sign perhaps of the cavern shifting below, or just a tale passed down for so long that no one remembers the line between story and memory. Some researchers believe Ubar was never just one city. It might have been a network, a system of trade hubs that rose and fell with the shifting sands. Others insist it was real, physical, and final. That the site, uncovered near Sure, is only a part of something much larger, still buried somewhere deeper in the desert. And there's one final twist. A few years after the initial excavation, an unusually shaped artifact was found just outside the collapse zone. It was made of stone, polished smooth, but shaped like a small tower with symbols etched in spirals around its base. Its purpose is unknown. Some believe it was ceremonial, while others think it was a warning, a monument meant to mark unstable ground. Whatever it is, it's now locked away in a museum unclassified. As you lie back and think of this ancient desert, imagine walking across endless dunes under a sky full of stars and suddenly realizing the ground beneath you is not what it seems. That the stillness hides something vast, something ancient, maybe the bones of a city, maybe the breath of legends, maybe both. Ubar reminds us that even in the most forgotten corners of the earth, there are stories waiting quietly just beneath the surface. And when we finally uncover them, they often whisper the same thing that we've never really understood the past. Not completely, not yet. The giant stairway beneath the Irish Sea. There's something curious stretching beneath the surface of the ocean, between the coastlines of Ireland and Scotland. Beneath the crashing waves and swirling mist, something ancient lies embedded in the bedrock. Something massive, geometric, and unexplainable. They call it the Giant's Causeway. At first glance, it looks like nature's strange artwork. Over 40,000 interlocking stone columns, mostly hexagonal, stand shoulder to shoulder, stretching like broken piano keys along the northern coast of Ireland. Some columns reach 12 m high, while others sink below the sea, vanishing into the depths. Geologists will tell you this was caused by a volcanic eruption some 50 to 60 million years ago. The lava cooled rapidly, they say, creating the perfect fractures and shapes. It's a clean, acceptable answer, but it doesn't explain everything. Because here's where the mystery deepens. Beneath the waves, recent sonar scans and underwater photography have shown that the strange hexagonal stones don't end at the shore. They continue under the sea, forming a submerged path that appears to lead directly to the coast of Scotland, where a matching formation exists known as Fingal's Cave. It's as if someone or something intentionally built a walkway across the Irish Sea. For centuries, locals have told a different story, a story too persistent, too specific to dismiss. According to Irish folklore, a giant named Fon Mucum Hale built the causeway with his bare hands. He wanted to cross the sea and challenge a rival giant in Scotland. So he began laying stones across the water, one by one, creating a bridge of solid rock. When you walk on it today, the scale of it feels off, too symmetrical, too precise. It doesn't feel like a fluke of nature. It feels deliberate. The shapes aren't just hexagonal. Some are octagonal. Some are curved. Some even seem polished, almost machine-like. Archaeologists have tried to study the underwater extensions, but the sea is rough, the visibility low, and the terrain hostile. Still, divers have confirmed that the stone pattern continues along the seafloor for hundreds of meters. How far it truly goes remains unknown. But here's the question that still lingers like the fog off the coast. If this is just a natural phenomenon, why does it appear only here? There are other basalt formations around the world, yes, but nowhere else do they form such a perfect navigable stairway between two lands. Nowhere else do they align so neatly, with folklore that predates modern science by centuries. Some fringe researchers believe this was once an ancient land bridge, a pathway used by early humans before the sea levels rose. Others take it further, claiming it's a remnant of a lost civilization, perhaps one that mastered stonework in ways we still can't replicate. And then there are those who whisper that it wasn't made for us at all, that long before humans, something else may have walked between those cliffs. Even now, as tourists tread carefully over the strange geometric pillars, they feel something, a quietness, a tension, as if the stones are keeping a secret too big to speak aloud. The sea has swallowed most of it, but what remains, what we can still touch, defies reason. So is it nature, myth, or a monument built by forgotten hands? No one knows. But the next time you stand there, surrounded by the echo of waves and stone beneath your feet, look to the horizon where the path disappears into the sea and wonder what lies at the other end. The ancient machinery buried beneath the mountains. There's a remote ridge in Central Asia where hikers sometimes report strange metallic echoes underfoot. When the wind dies down and the mountains fall silent, there are spots where the ground makes a hollow sound like there's something beneath the earth that shouldn't be there. Most people walk past it, but in 1998, a team of geologists testing soil density for mineral surveys stumbled onto something strange. They were looking for copper, but they're seismic. Readings suggested something artificial, massive, symmetrical, and not made of rock. At first, they thought it might be Cold War debris, maybe an abandoned military facility. But when they drilled a test shaft just a few meters down, the drill bit hit something it wasn't supposed to. Solid metal, not rusted, not jagged, smooth, and oddly warm to the touch. It didn't match any industrial alloy. And the deeper they drilled, the stranger it became. They found rows, parallel patterns running horizontally through the rock strata, almost like pipes or rails. This wasn't built in the last century. It was buried beneath untouched rock layers that predated recorded history. The dig was quietly shut down. A week later, the team was pulled out. No official reason was given. Local officials said it was for environmental protection, but no one bought that. Rumors spread among geologists and independent researchers. Some said the structure extended for miles. Others believed it wasn't just one structure, but part of a larger system, a network of unknown technology. Older than the Ice Age. And then it got weirder. A year later, a geologist from the original team published an anonymous paper. In it, he described what appeared to be a rotor-like assembly encased in quartz, a shape too symmetrical to be natural, with a curved outer housing like some kind of ancient turbine. He claimed to have taken samples, but shortly after his paper was scrubbed from online archives, and he stopped answering emails. To this day, there are no official records of what lies beneath that ridge. No follow-up expeditions, no public excavation, but every so often, hikers still stop there. They talk about a faint humming or hearing deep vibrations too low for the ears, but strong enough to feel in your bones. What if that mountain is hiding a machine not built by us, not even built for humans, just waiting, buried, forgotten, and the only reason we haven't found it yet is because we're not supposed to? The sealed vault beneath the forgotten monastery. There's a place in Northern Europe, its location, deliberately kept vague by those who study it, where a forgotten stone monastery once stood on a forested ridge far from the modern world. Overgrown paths lead to the remnants of its weathered foundation, covered in moss and nearly devoured by the wild. But what lies beneath it has puzzled archaeologists for decades. The story begins in the mid-1990s when a group of regional historians began surveying old religious sites using ground-penetrating radar. Most locations showed expected foundations, stone walls, cellars, even burial grounds. But when the team passed their instruments over the ruins of this monastery, they found something strange. Beneath the building, about 6 m underground, was a large rectangular void. It wasn't just a basement. It was a perfectly sealed underground chamber, 40 feet long and untouched by time. There were no stairs, no known access points. The stone surrounding it had not been broken. It was as if someone had constructed this room, sealed it entirely, and left no way to return. At first, the team assumed it might be a crypt, perhaps the resting place of some long-forgotten religious figure. But the shape of the chamber, the material used, and the fact that it had no Christian markings made that explanation doubtful. There were no signs of tombs, sarcophagi, or even religious architecture. And the strange part, the monastery records preserved in fragile ink on calfskin parchment made no mention of any construction underground. It was as if the monks themselves never knew it was there, or they were forbidden to mention it. A few years later, a small team received a permit to excavate part of the ground. After months of careful digging and reinforcement, they finally reached the outer stone of the vault. The material wasn't what they expected. It wasn't the same granite found in the area. It was a dark polished basalt, unnaturally smooth and cool to the touch, almost like obsidian, but far denser. The team drilled cautiously. No one wanted to destroy the integrity of the structure, but curiosity pushed them to create a small bore hole through one side. When they inserted a fiber optic camera through the gap, they saw something none of them expected. Inside the chamber wasn't just empty space. There were shelves carved directly into the walls. And on these shelves were dozens of sealed clay jars, all identical in size and shape. In the center of the room was a low pedestal, and on that pedestal, resting completely unguarded, was a thick stone tablet covered in inscriptions that no one could immediately recognize. And then something stranger happened. When one of the researchers replayed the camera footage later that night, they noticed an odd flicker near the tablet. It wasn't a reflection or dust. This was different. It appeared for just 2 frames, like a shimmer or distortion in the air above the pedestal. The camera lens was thoroughly inspected. There was no damage, no moisture, no explanation. Speculation exploded. Some believed the vault was an early time capsule, a place where knowledge had been deliberately hidden during a time of upheaval, possibly the Black Death or earlier. Others thought it might be a pre-Christian archive, a remnant of some forgotten society that knew it had to disappear. But none of those theories explained the shimmering anomaly. When they tried to open one of the sealed clay jars, the team encountered a second mystery. Each jar was pressurized, strange for ancient pottery. Breaking one required careful depressurization, like opening a container made in a modern lab. Inside, they didn't find scrolls or ash. Instead, the first jar contained finely ground metallic dust, not gold, not silver, something with properties not fully identified. It had high magnetic resonance and traces of rare earth elements not common to that region. Then came the decision no one wanted to make, opening the chamber completely. Several senior archaeologists objected. They believed the chamber had been sealed for a reason. Others argued that this was the find of the century. In the end, the dig was halted indefinitely. No government officially claimed ownership. No museum stepped forward to take possession. And so the vault remains untouched beneath the overgrowth of a forgotten hill, still holding its jars, its tablet, and whatever secret makes the air inside shimmer. No one can explain who built the vault, how they created such advanced containment techniques, or what the materials inside were meant for. Some believe it's evidence of knowledge far older than the monastery above it, older than Christianity itself. Others whisper that it's not just a vault, but a warning, and maybe that's why it's still sealed. The ivory map that shows lands no one remembers. In a small coastal village in southern Italy, tucked away in a family-run museum that barely gets visitors, there lies a strange artifact behind thick glass. It's not large, maybe the size of a dinner plate, and it's carved from a single slab of aged ivory, yellowed by time, cracked at the edges, and smoothed by years of handling. It looks like an ancient calendar at first glance, but upon closer inspection, it reveals something more puzzling. A detailed, circular map of a world no one seems to recognize. The artifact was first recorded in 1902, found buried beneath the stone floor of a ruined watchtower overlooking the sea. The tower itself had collapsed centuries earlier, but its foundation revealed layers of occupation, Roman, Byzantine, and perhaps older. The ivory disc was found within a small bronze box, carefully wrapped in decaying linen. At first, it was dismissed as an artist's fantasy, a decorative piece, maybe, but the carvings on the surface sparked questions. The map showed coastlines and mountain ranges etched with stunning precision. There were no written labels, but there were strange geometric notations, grids, intersecting arcs, and what looked like rising sun positions marked on certain points of the map's curved lines. But what truly made it mysterious were the continents it displayed. Scholars noticed something unsettling. One of the land masses resembled Antarctica, but without ice. Another resembled a northern extension of Africa, bulging out into the Atlantic, a feature that doesn't exist on modern maps. And there was an enormous island located in the middle of the Indian Ocean where nothing but deep sea lies today. Multiple crafters from different universities examined the disk. Some believe the map might be a mythological interpretation, a kind of symbolic representation of the world, similar to ancient Babylonian clay maps. Others weren't so sure. The geometry on the disk wasn't random. When overlaid digitally with modern global coordinates, the arcs aligned with known solar declinations, something ancient civilizations weren't thought to have fully mapped, especially not with this kind of global accuracy. The ivory itself was dated, not by carbon, but by isotopic decay within trace residues from a wooden fragment in a bronze box. The results suggested the artifact was at least 4,000 years old. That predates most formal world maps by more than 2,000 years. One specialist in ancient graphy quietly noted that the proportions of the land masses on the disk seemed almost too accurate for something so old, especially the depiction of coastlines that wouldn't be visible if polar ice caps existed in their current form. It begged a simple, strange question. Was this map made by someone who saw the Earth differently, or during a time when it looked different altogether? There's an even deeper layer of intrigue. In one of the curved sections on the lower quadrant of the disk, there's a cluster of small dots, 5 in total, arranged like a constellation. When overlaid on modern satellite data, those dots eerily match. The peaks of 5 now submerged mountaintops deep in the South Pacific. These peaks, part of a buried ridge, are believed to have been above sea level over 10,000 years ago. That discovery has led some to wonder, could this ivory disk be a memory from before the end of the last ice age? A quiet theory has emerged among a few researchers. What if this map isn't based on myth at all? What if it's a snapshot from a civilization advanced enough to chart the seas, to understand the arc of the sun across seasons, and to encode that knowledge into a piece of art or record that survived the collapse of everything they knew? But if such a civilization existed, where are the remains? Why have no other maps like this been found? Could this be the last surviving piece from a people whose cities now lie drowned, their stories lost beneath rising seas and shifting tectonic plates? No one knows who carved the map. No one could decipher the full meaning of its geometry, and no other artifact like it has ever turned up despite decades of searching. The ivory disk now rests quietly in a display case, rarely noticed by visitors who assume it's just another relic among many. But to those who've studied it closely, it whispers of a forgotten world, a version of Earth we're no longer supposed to remember, in a time before a time. Maybe this isn't just a map of the world. Maybe it's a memory waiting to be rediscovered.